It looks real live.
We're live. Welcome, everyone. This is Michael Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Architects. How are you all today? I am here with my good friend and fantastic network architect and cloud network architect, Akwo. Today, we're going to be talking about networking and lessons learned over 20 years in the networking world. For those of you that are new to this industry, you may not realize that cloud computing is really just the next evolution of the network and the data center. In fact, people like Akwo and me have been working on clouds for decades. And because, he and I have been working on clouds for decades, there have been so many lessons learned. Aqua and I both worked on two sides of the pond. Theoretically, I'm from the US, though I've worked probably in every country. I know Aqua's theoretically born in the UK, but I know all the countries he's worked in. And, it's really great when we get the opportunity to take two people that have been in industry for decades and share our experiences. So I'm really honored to have Akwo here. Now, Akwo is also very special. Akwo is part of a very special group called We Fun. And I always get that name wrong, but it's a group of Cameroonians that work together to really help each other get AWS certified, build cloud computing careers. I mean, it's one of the best communities I've ever seen. And every once in a while, they invite me to talk to this group. And it's such an honor because I got to tell you, the people in this group are so amazing. And, that group inspires me every day. And Aqua is a big part of that group. And I know he's there. So Aqua and I are going to talk about, networking, but the cloud is just a virtualized network in a data center. So we're going to talk about lessons learned. I'm real honored to have Aqua here. I'm really excited to have as many of you that are here. So to let you know, that's what Aqua and I are going to talk about today. Now, just as a reminder, tonight we have Daryl Proctor coming in. Daryl Proctor and I grew up together. I mean, we were at Riverstone together. I would go tell my management they had to hire Daryl. Daryl would tell his management they had to hire me. The two of us looked out for each other's careers for decades. He's been a leader at Dell, at Rockport Networks, and now he's a leader at Palo Alto, and that's going on tonight. But Aqua and I were speaking yesterday. He and I were talking networking, and I said, Aqua, can you pop on my channel within like 36 hours notice and talk networking? So I'm really honored, excited. So Aqua, if you'd like to introduce yourself for a few moments, tell people about your background, and then we'll have some fun talking about the past, the present, the future, and where we see this industry going, because I know you're always on trend too.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's a real honor to share this stage with you. I mean, when you told me about it, I was almost taken aback. Said, "Oh, wow, what am I going to talk about?" But I'm very, very grateful, and I really admire the work that you do and the steps that you've taken in really being an evangelist in cloud computing. For all of us. So I'm truly honored and grateful to be here. So I'd like to say hello to everybody who's watching this broadcast. I'm based in England, and my name is Akwo Efimba. I am a network consultant. Well, I started off as a telecoms engineer close to 25 years ago, back in 1996. It betrays the age that I am, still looking youthful. And I've been in data networking for a period of close to 20 years. And it's been a very, very privileged position to be in, to see the evolution of our industry and to see the impact it's had on the way we live, the way we work, and how it impacts, every single facet of our lives. So I'm really, really grateful to share this platform, to speak to you, to a lot of you out there today. I hope Mike and I can share a little bit of what we learned in this time. And so look forward to a good conversation.
And thank you so much there, Aqua. 1996, when I hear you say that, that's the year I actually got married. It was in that 1996, 1997 reason where I went, this healthcare thing is fun, but wow, what is this Red Hat Linux thing? Oh, this is really cool. What is this Novell Networks thing? This is really cool. What is this Cisco thing? And that's when I got infatuated with tech. So, now we're in cloud. Now, cloud is just a network and a data center that's been virtualized. And I remember when you and I started, there was the Frame Relay Cloud. I don't know if you ever worked on Frame Relay. I think that may have been a year or two earlier. But I'll describe the Frame Relay Cloud for those that have not used to it. We used to basically connect to a cloud. And what happened is this cloud was a series of switches, and the switches would just create these logical connections. So it used to be, prior to the frame relay cloud, if you wanted a connection or a link, you would just buy a private line between point A and point B. It was called the leased line. Now they call it a direct connection. It's the same thing as a private line. Hasn't changed in the last 50, 60 years, but other than the speed. So we used to buy that. Then all of a sudden we could buy a link to the cloud, and then we could ride the cloud's network. That cloud did it for us. Now, when we all drew the cloud, and I know, Akwo, you drew lots of clouds in your diagrams. The whole point of the cloud is you didn't know what was going on in there. Like, there were switches, but we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know where these circuits were. They were just there, so it was a cloud. Akwo, I feel like the cloud providers of today have done the same job of the cloud providers 30 years ago in explaining the cloud. Do you think any of these cloud providers made it clear what they actually do?
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing about a cloud. You know, when it's a cloud, it's this form which you can put whatever it is that you want in it, and it can take whatever meaning that you want it to mean. But the main thing is that the complexity and the sophistication is all hidden away from the user. And yes, I remember frame relay very well. I mean, it was a time in which that became the standard of data networking. And I mean, in my view, when I joined this industry, and I had the privilege of actually working for one of the largest, the biggest telecom service providers in the United Kingdom, with British Telecom. And I think you all have to look at this in the stage of, you know, how connectivity and networking services were delivered during that time. The world was very, very different from what we know today, even in the space of 25 years. And it's not very long. I mean, if we consider that, you know, you have to look at the advent of, first of all, you know, the forms of communications that we've had, you know, from the telegraph, and then from there to the phone. So, I mean, the phone was only discovered only last century by an American, Alexander Graham Bell. And then that started a whole different revolution. And then coming to think that, you know, the first computers were really just created just around World War II. Now, in the environment where I live in, here in England, I live near a place called Bletchley Park. Now, that's a world famous place because it was where the British government created its largest computer in the 1940s that was used to crack the German Enigma code. And that helped Britain and America in the war effort during the Second World War, because they could then kind of like reroute sea route convoys by breaking that code. That was I would say the first kind of like use of a computer. And if you look another, it's less than 100 years, we've gone leaps and bounds. We're now talking about cloud computing, whereby, you know, the power of that computing technology at that time is now in your hand.
It's amazing.
In your hand. So it's amazing, the kind of evolution. And on the backdrop of that, there is that connections which we're making, whereby I can talk to you right now, Mike, and we're communicating with everybody else, which is there, which in the 1940s, that was revolutionary. But now it's seen as the norm.
It really isn't. It's amazing. No, one of the things that I find so interesting about the old clouds like Frame Relay is we used to buy a link. Let's say we bought an E1 link, which was 2.04 at megs, and that E1 link to the Frame Relay cloud, that could have been $5,000 or $10,000 a month. It was a lot of money. But what was really neat is once we connected to that cloud, we could connect to the London one, a Lagos office, for example, a Cape Town office, a Bangalore office, all on that same link. And what was even cooler, and it reminds me of, you know, cloud computing of today, is We could buy each link. Let's say we were guaranteed 64K because it was high-speed networking, but we could burst to like 128K if there was unused capacity. So when we look at those old clouds, these all switches enabled us our own version of temporary auto scaling 30 years ago. So purchase 64K, but if there's extra bandwidth in the service provider, get 128K. And just that was the foundation of what we do now. Think of it this way. We buy a server, compute instance, virtual machine, I don't care what you call it. And all of a sudden the CPU hits 80% and we need more, we can burst. In fact, some of these compute virtual machines that you can even buy in the cloud are burstable. It goes back to that same thing we did years ago.
Now, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of frame relay. I mean, you had the whole thing about switched virtual circuits. So you had to actually nail down the bandwidth between any 2 points in order to get it. And I think another thing to just point out is that the actual circuits that were used at the time were known as they were not really fully digital circuits anyway. No. So there were different type of technologies, and the speeds that you could actually get were very much limited. So you could only get, as you say, a T1 in the US or an E1, either 2 meg or 1.5 meg, being kind of like the very high bandwidths that most people could get back in the late 90s. And then if you wanted to go that extra mile, you could go up to say 45 meg or 34 meg. So it was only later on with the advent of, the SDH, the synchronous digital hierarchy, where we're able to achieve more speeds in terms of connectivity. But yeah, frame relay was there. I mean, it was great. It was very expensive. I mean, a 2 meg or I say as a T1 was very much distance dependent. So the backhaul. So every time you had to look at this, you had to say, okay, where was your point of presence? Because anytime you have a network, there is a place where that network must terminate, and that's the place by which a client or a customer will connect onto that network. And so, in most cases, if you had some case like a factory, whereby they needed to connect, and that factory had to go, cross massive distances. It could get very, very, very expensive. And, at that time, there were no mobile networks available. In fact, I think the mobile network started to become a bit more mainstream around 1994, 1996, which could provide another, and it took a while for that to actually get, the speeds that we now see today. So yeah, frame relay was amazing. The thing that you knew that if you were delivering a high availability solution, for example, that consisted of a main E1 or T1 circuit, and then you provide something which is known as ISDN.
I was just thinking of that.
And you remember ISDN?
I was just thinking of those ISDN backups.
So the maximum bandwidth there was 64 kilobits.
So for those of you that are not familiar with what Akwo is talking about, so in today's world, when we connect to the cloud, we buy a private line or a direct connection, just basically a wire, and we can talk about that another day, how it works. And we use a VPN, basically the internet. We encrypted it, create an IPsec tunnel. What we used to use is we'd have, say, frame relay, and then we would have this modem. And there was this thing as a digital phone line. And what would happen is the phone line would create a connection to the internet service provider or the remote access. And it was 64K, and you could bundle up to 2 of them together. And they would use something called the point-to-point protocol, and you would basically inverse multiplex them together. And then you had 64K plus 64K, which was 128K, which would enable you to download the Linux operating system over the course of like 3 days. It was really amazing. But that's what we actually did. We had these circuits, and what would happen is we'd basically run something like a health check or an OSPF hello. We'd be looking for a route, and if the route would go down, we would have a dial-up backup. And it worked great, but these circuits were complicated. People like Akwo that worked on ISDN can tell you horror stories.
Oh, and this is what was used for, to connect a lot of shops, because it had 2 channels. It had a B channel and a D channel. The B channel was the 64K, and the D channel was 16K. but you'd be amazed what the 16K channel was being used for. So it was used for a lot of point of sale applications. So a lot of cases where people had shops and then they wanted to, get back they wanted their teller machines to communicate with the HQ. They used that D channel ISDN. So, and it's amazing that at the time people were used to those kind of speeds, which they had. And things have evolved back then with this integrated switch digital network technology, and then you had frame relay, and we had some very much other interesting things. But one thing I'd like to point out is that at that time we're talking about this, the world of data networking and the world of voice services were considered two separate domains. So you find that everybody else, you said, oh, I'm a voice engineer, I'm a data engineer. There are very few people that were known as, I mean, right now you're known as a communications engineer or a communications consultant. Yeah. So do you remember that time, Mike, when people were saying, okay, I'm either voice or data, there's a separate team for voice services and a separate team for data services?
Not only were they separate, Akwo, here's what I remember. First, I learned computers before I learned network. So I did that whole MCSE thing. I used to like to play with Windows and Linux. I didn't realize. And then when I got to networking, they're like, oh, that's a computer. I don't use computers. I'm a network engineer. I only use a computer for ping, telnet, and traceroute. And I don't use it. And then they were like, oh, these are the voice people. They're a separate set of people. They're the closet voice people. And I remember thinking, like, one day all this stuff is going to be together. And I remember thinking, and I remember when voice over IP first came out, and this, was the coolest thing, because instead of calling family members in Greece and it costing like $2 a minute, you could just create a connection and have phone calls, and it would be cheap. And oh wait, you could now have 8 phone calls for the same price of a 64K line. Boy, that was really exciting to me. So yeah, I remember when they were all separate. I also remember trying to pretend to tell people that I didn't know how to use a computer. Because if you were a network engineer and you didn't do that, you'd be like troubleshooting people's computers. And if you wanted to have a good career, I don't know how that works. No, I don't know. That's the computer people. Go ask one of those sysadmins. I don't know. Now it's all somewhat consolidated.
Yeah, it is, and I think that with the advent of of the internet in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the growth in this industry of calling cards, where service providers could use voice compression and direct traffic over the new internet, and that people could have cheap calls. You could call things, and the revenues for some of the big service providers actually plummeted. But that was the really first use of the internet being used as a means of business use, where people were really getting some good value for money from being able to call different parts of the world at cheap rates. So that technology there really helped achieve some amazing things. Now it's totally different, and and it's before the real advent of mobile phones, and now it's a different story. Virtually anybody uses calling cards anymore, because you have everything now at the tip of your hand.
It's pretty amazing, and it's true. I remember, especially because in the US we have very good wiring under the ground, so we've got a very good cabling environment. Outside the US, there's typically less wired infrastructure, so the wireless services outside the US are often much better. I remember it was about 2001. Yeah, it was 2001, and I had been sent over to Dubai. Apparently, somebody had bought a voice, data, and video fiber optic to the premises in around 2000, 2001. And this was the coolest thing. Everybody had a 100 meg Ethernet connection to their house via fast Ethernet over fiber. Everybody had 2 TVs that were voice over IP. They had IP voice. This was on another VLAN. This was the coolest thing. Customer bought it. It didn't work. And I was a multicast engineer, so I was sent there. And I remember I got off the plane and there was a sign that said MMS, and it was talking about a certain number of calls per minute. And I remember asking people, what's MMS? And they said, oh, it's when you send a message with your phone, then it can have like a picture or audio. And I was like, send a message with your phone with a picture and audio? Because in the US, we didn't have that. And you'd think we would, but in the US, we had really good underground wiring, where when I'd go to Greece, they don't have good wiring in Greece, at least they didn't used to, but they had really good mobile services. So that's when I started to see what was going on mobile network-wise. But what really amazed me in all these years is how good we had to be. So Akwo, when you and I started out, We didn't have computers that had 128 cores and 4 terabytes of DRAM. We didn't have 100 gig network connections. We didn't have routers that could literally handle 10 million routes. We had routers with 16 megahertz or 16 gigs or megabytes of RAM and a 10 gigahertz CPU, and we had to be really efficient. So what did you learn about that core access distribution, the designing in those days? I know I did. Those lessons learned about architecture in those days, that we had to be so good because of limited resources. And I still feel if you follow those same principles, that core access distribution, the building for decoupling, if you will, I feel like those principles now, if we use them now, will keep people out of trouble. What are your experiences about those old time principles about dealing with things when you've got less capacity and less room for error?
Well, I think things were a lot simpler back then in terms of you knew that everything was going to be kind of like a star network, hub and spoke as we define it today. So everything had to come into a central location. You're just going to connect to a central location. The speeds were what they were. You always had to take into account as well to what is generally known as contention. Kind of factor that in, and more or less limit every single location's capacity or ability to transmit, so that at least everybody had an opportunity. So kind of like going to the similar thing that, kind of like the token ring infrastructure. You had to kind of like apply that to the cloud. But most of the time, point-to-point services, dedicated point-to-point services was the way ahead. Lease lines were very, very big. People used that, connected all their lease lines to the HQ, to the head office. And that's how they managed these things. And they found that, it ended up being very good for them. And later on, it's only when, the managed networks and the, frame relay came in and changed the whole market landscape considerably, making it a lot cheaper. Instead of managing hundreds of lease lines, you had somebody take away some of that burden for you. And I think that the whole thing there was we as network engineers at the time now had to go around, calculating how much each site had to deliver. And by this stage, the internet was still trying to make its name. And modems at best, you remember modems were 33K. You could get even a 56K modem, and if at all you really had a good modem, you could get up to 64K. That's a thing of the that's a thing of the past now. I mean, those are the first kind of rudimentary kind of routers, so to speak. And Cisco, made a big name for itself in the late 90s, set the standard for networking. I mean, there were other players down there, but I think because they had such inspired leadership, they had great technology, and the way how they set things up, and their distribution was phenomenal, and support. It was just something where it caught on and became the standard of networking as we know it today. So if anybody wants to even know about networking, it's no exaggeration to say that the standard is Cisco, or Cisco is the standard, because they just really changed the way how data networking was in those early days, and they still do today.
It really does. And, when people ask me and they say, I want to be a cloud network architect, I say, learn Cisco. Now, in today's world, I'm also going to say aviatrix too, because I love that approach. But, I'm going to say, you want to be a cloud network person, aviatrix and Cisco, they're your two places to get your networking. Obviously, I'm good with Juniper Networks or the other big networking people, but, that's where I'm at right now when I'm starting to look at, hardcore networking. Lessons learned from the networking people, and that's where you're going to get it. But it's those other things. So, you talked about, modems of 2,800 baud, 33,000 baud. I pathetically started out with a 300 baud modem, 300 bits per second, but that was neither here nor there. But what's so interesting is Akwo's talking about these really low speed links, these 56K leased lines, these 64K leased lines. But when he talked about hub and spoke, and he also talked about keeping them down, we would run things called QoS policies, and we would rate limit these little links. So if anything happened, like a person wanted to download too many music songs, they wouldn't disconnect the office, because in those days people would go to Napster, and that was like 80% of the internet traffic. Napster and illicit use, but that's neither here nor there. So that was the primary use. So we'd be running QoS and rate limiting on these WAN links, and we would be doing so much route summarization to limit the amount of routing information. In the end, we decoupled our network so much, like the 3-tier website that you typically think about, where you've got your web, app, and database tiers with load balancers separating them. We did that with networking 30 years ago because we had no choice. We had to decouple everything. We had to create redundancy protocols. We came up with things like virtual router redundancy protocols, so you could point your host to 2 routers, and if one would fail, things would be there. We created the concept of a virtual LAN, where we took a switch and we virtualized it into multiple switches. Then we came up with the concept of a container, where we took a VLAN and we created the concept of a private VLAN, where servers couldn't talk to each other in the same VLAN. And then we talked to, I mean, all of it, everything we're doing here is all new cloud computing. It's all the same stuff for 30 years. So given that you've been in this industry for 20 years, doesn't it feel easy every time something new comes up for you?
It does. But I think that in the end, I think one thing to also mention was the fact that although there are a lot of competing technologies there, one of them came up top. First of all, IP, into the Internet Protocol, TCP/IP, which then became the de facto standard, just gained prominence. And all the other ones just kind of like feathered away. Nobody talks about things like IPX anymore. For example, and I think another important thing to note there is that, especially when we were network engineers, the whole thing about protocols, the standards by which these machines needed to talk to each other, and it was very in the early 2000s. That's why the Cisco CCIE, the Certified Internet Engineer, was so prized, because these networks were very, very chatty. They were very unruly. And then being able to master, to control the amount of management traffic going through so that it didn't affect, client traffic running through, to minimizing that, was such a big skill to have in setting those up, because you had the BGP, the Border Gateway Protocols there, which was a convention by which most of these devices were communicating with the internet. And then you had the internal gateway protocols, which were the language which these the private networks are all going up. And then you had things like the Cisco popularized its EIGRP.
Why do you mention that?
RIP, the RIP, and all those things. So, and then eventually, even though we had all these diverse protocols, standards, it all came down to a handful of them, BGP and OSPF. So in a way, all through, competition and I'd say popularity, some of the other protocols, which were fine, kind of like withered away, and it's made things a little bit easier right now, so people can focus on certain things like the Border Gateway Protocol or OSPF, Open Short Path First, in order to manage these networks. So in this new age of cloud computing right now, we're dealing with these protocols and these methods of communications of managing these devices, which have been around for the best part of 25 years.
It's interesting you mentioned these protocols. And actually, I've always been a fan for things that are industry interoperable. So now when I talk about multi-clouds, there's a reason. When I talk about not using a DynamoDB, not because DynamoDB isn't great, it's an amazing NoSQL database, but I'd rather somebody use a Cassandra or a MongoDB that can be spread across the AWS cloud and the Azure cloud and the GCP cloud all at the same time. In networking, we didn't use a single vendor, because if we put everything to the same vendor, the same WAN provider, let's say BT, what happens if BT would go down? So We worked really hard, as you know, with networking to make sure we had two providers and making sure that the local part of the two providers was separate. But it's funny, I've always believed in standards. In fact, Jesse from my team, who's moderating this call and he's producing this show today, he found somehow an old paper of mine that was called an EIGRP to OSPF migration strategy. He sent it to me. It was from before I had any executive communication training and executive presence and executive writing training. It was just me, fresh out of a CCIE program back from like 2000. And when I saw this 56-page document the other day, it brought me back to feeling like a child. But the key is we had these protocols, Akwo. The protocols were like the modern GPS. How do you get your data through the network? How does it determine the routes? How does it determine the best paths? And we were there, and these were these complicated protocols. And people like me who became CCIEs, that's all we knew. I knew nothing other than routing protocols for years. I mean, literally, it was like, okay, this sends a message that, okay, these two form an adjacency. They flood LSAs. This route's calculated. These are the LSAs that are here. And literally speaking, we network engineers literally just thought in terms of protocols. Literally nothing other than what are these protocols doing? Now, so much of it's automated, but if we still know the protocols, we can do it. But you can still see 30 years later, you don't know a protocol like what just happened at Facebook. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what to do. You make a mistake, $8 billion lost in one day from a network error. So that's how important the network is. And I don't know about you, but at least in the US and Canada, it's almost as if the people never thought about the network until it didn't work. It was the thing that people only thought about the applications.
Yeah, I think that in the end, knowing things from first principles is always great. And until, as you say, something stops working, that's when people start to think about it. But I think the great thing about this times that we have is that the complexity, a lot of the complexity has been hidden, has been automated,
Yes.
has been made, very easy to. I'd say somewhat easier to do if you understand it. The GUIs now, the graphical user interfaces that allow you to make some associations. Before, I mean, in the past, you had to really just do a command line for every single different protocol that you're doing with. And you can imagine that, and I think that's why people were so heavily specialized. People were. You had somebody with a piece of equipment, and that equipment had a proprietary code, and you had to understand what the command line was for that code. I mean, I remember back in 2003, I happened to be configuring an Ericsson PBX, an MD111.
Remember them?
110. It was one of the best industry, PBXs in today. But the command line, I mean, and I just knew kind of like the basic things in order to establish extensions and the like. But at the same time as well, during that time, Cisco had just released its call manager. That's its first digital voice piece of equipment that allowed voice and data right now to be transported over the same network. I mean, the difference between the two was kind of like night and day, in terms of its operation. So you could see that then again, as you say, Cisco was dealing with open standards, adopting open standards, and the rest of the industry was moving away from those proprietary technologies to open standards, as you mentioned. TCP/IP being very heavily, being a heavy part of it, and a lot of growth to happen too with the likes of the IEEE actually pushing these initiatives to everyone else. But I think the key thing that really made the uptake of things was that everybody tend to adopt a common standard, and that has really made it easier for people to learn and to pick up these things a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it's those common standards that are really just so important. I'm not going to say that I haven't worked through my share of EIGRP networks, and I have. And there are times where I would still use EIGRP because there's some tuning and performance tuning that you can do that makes it possible. I do like an industry standard solution. I don't like being locked into anything or anyone. There's But at the same time, if I can choose to narrow my focus down between 1 or 2 or 3 vendors that I know and trust, I think it's a little better. That brings us to a concept of architectures, which I know you and I have both done. You have the option of best of breed for highest performance and an end-to-end total solution. And that's where it gets kind of interesting. I worked on one firm on Wall Street, and their approach was, I'm going to buy the best box, whatever it is. And when I was there, this company had the highest performing everything. And then when I looked at it, I said, this isn't going to work. And they're like, this is the best. This is the best. This is the best. This is the best. And then they said, we have a lot of problems with our Cisco stuff. And I said, what do you mean you have a lot of problems with your Cisco stuff? And they said, oh, it breaks every day. And then I looked at what they had done. And this thing was done wrong. This thing was done wrong. This thing was done wrong. And then I was like, you've got 14 vendors that you're using on your network. How are you even going to figure out whose stuff is good? You're blaming the one in the middle. I remember I removed some of the vendors, brought additional Cisco things, and everything was perfect. And I learned a really critical architecture thing then. It goes back to that Occam's razor. The simplest solution is usually the best. I think we basically, we especially as network people, had the ability to overcomplicate things beyond belief. And I think a lot of us did it.
Absolutely. And, in the end, it's because of that ease, which, everybody wanted to make things simpler anyway, that, there were some very big winners in there, where some vendors just really dominated the space. And when it came around to it, people just simply gravitated, to that single vendor, and Cisco was a major beneficiary of that. Juniper came into that industry as well to provide some competition, and they came up with a very solid product. And there are some other people as well. But I think what really made it really big was those open standards, as we mentioned, and in a lot of cases as well, I think what happened is that there was a lot of consolidation within the industry, whereby some key players were brought in. So there's some things that some people were really doing very well, and they were brought into the fold of other big organizations. So Cisco was able to, very much to expand its portfolio of services, for networking, especially traffic management, and the ability to as well to provide this elusive term called a quality of service. And quality of service is very big in the networking space, because in the end, it is the means by which you can provide, guarantees or service commitments that would allow certain applications to be transported effectively from one point to another along the way. So that's one of those things that would allow you, in the end, you have a big pipe, and within that big pipe, which is your the pipe which you connect onto the network, you can send anything that you want to send across it, and you'll have the full confidence in knowing that, all of those things that which you sent will get there, because as a network engineer, you are thinking about what do we prioritize? What's the nature of all of these, these different traffic types, and how would you prioritize them to make sure that at least everything got delivered on time and to the other end? So it's one of those things, and I remember the times when you used to ask a client, said, okay, what type of applications are you using? And try to capture that, so that you try and anticipate what what could be put into what queue, so that you'll have that excellent quality of service which you could provide the client, from end to end. So it's one of the things which the telcos did very well in doing, and way before the advent of the internet, and now over the internet, it's something totally different altogether.
Yeah, but you really made a point. So for people that have not come from this background, Akwo made a really brilliant point about quality of service and what it really was. So let's say, for example, you had a 1 gig connection between your office and the data center. Now, today, 1 gig is no big deal, but in the world Akwo and I come from, 1 gig would be about $1 million a month. But now it's no big deal. It's a couple $100 a month. Thankfully, things got cheaper. But what would happen is, let's say you've got this link and you had somebody that in those days was downloading Napster, for example. It was how do you download music. And literally speaking, the music would come and it would fill up the entire network connection. And then the business applications didn't work. The users needed to do their job and they couldn't. And it was all because somebody was downloading music. Now, here's the thing. We started using queuing policies. We started being able to limit traffic that wasn't good. Now, fast forward a few years. Now, we've got big links between our offices and the cloud. But if we get a worm, and we've got a big server with 128 cores and a 100 gig network card, that worm can fill up a 100 gig Ethernet link with worm traffic. And guess what? Your data is not going through, your voice isn't going through, your video is not going through. All of those same problems we had 30 years ago, we still have. So all that underlying complexity that we knew how to make sure the traffic got there on time, made sure all the messages were delivered, it's all applicable now. None of it's changed. And now when you start looking at a web architecture and you start thinking about multiple web servers front-ended by a load balancer in case one were to fail, for example, you've got a bunch. You do the same thing with the app servers, and then you've got a database. And on the way to the database, you've got a queuing system, like an SQS queue. Where'd that come from? It came from queuing from networking 40 years ago. The whole point is you're decoupling and you're smoothing, you're eliminating single points of failure. So, Akwo, a great cloud architect like you, and I know your design skills, how much do you fall back to networking and those networking things when you think about cloud architecture?
Well, all the time, and it's interesting that you mentioned, a service such as the simple queuing service from AWS, because that is the kind of like the means by which you set up the class of service. You knew that there was a latency budget, which you could have. You knew that there was a kind of like a packet loss allowance, which you could take into account. And interestingly enough, that's the same thing which is being used in the cloud, especially when it comes to latency budgets. There will be some tasks or some roles which would take some amount of time, and so those need to be considered. So I always fall back on that knowledge to know, okay, what is a latency budget that you need to take into account. What's a kind of like a packet lost, and there's another thing which was known as what is called jitter, which was kind of like the variation of your of change with
latency, variations in latency.
Yeah, so it was always about keeping that consistent. So if there was kind of like a consistent delay, consistent delay at every single hop that you take, then you could more or less control the quality of the interaction that you had. And I think there are lots of things that have been taken right now back into the into the cloud world regarding that. There's the element now. We now talk about optimization. You optimize it in such a way that you prioritize certain streams, or you more or less push or more or less push or encourage some certain transactions or some certain workloads to go faster across the network. So sometimes when you're looking at cloud computing and you're trying to understand some of these things, yes, you can fall back on some of the concepts where you had to deal with on cloud networking. So that's a great insight, Mike, in terms of the kind of experiences that we had.
And then in a minute, I'd like to get into the future where you see the industry going, because I know you always have good perception, but I guess there's kind of one or two more of these thoughts that I'm thinking. In my background, because I was kind of a lead architect at some of the bigger network vendors, I was always getting pulled into the stuff that was really broken. Like if a customer was not satisfied, I'd get brought in. And whether it was Cisco or Riverstone, I was always being pulled into these big things, mostly because I had two specialties, BGP and IP multicast. And those two things were two really rare skill sets. So I'd get pulled into everything because those were the things to break. How critical do you think networking is to the actual cloud architect with regards to the design for making sure things that are work, they perform properly? How important do you think that addressing scheme is and that routing scheme? Do you think it's even possible to build a good solution without getting that off set up right?
No, it isn't. I think it's ultimately the foundation of things. And you find now we're talking now, the IP version 4 and IP version 6. And, to those of you that are encountering this for the very first time, I know it'll be one of those really daunting things to really wrap your head around, but it's an addressing system. It's a means of identification. And, some very intelligent people, smart people came up with a standard by which it is. And there's just simply no way around it. But I think the good news is that we have one standard, which is this internet protocol standard that will allow us to identify things. But I think it's just critical for us to understand that as, it's part of the fundamentals, the base by which you will build things upon. You must be able to identify your assets and your resources wherever they are. So if you create that bucket or you create that container in which all your resources and assets are going to operate, you must have a means of identifying them. And networking does give you, so networking is that foundation upon which all those other things will rely upon, be it, your storage, be it when it comes to your data analytics, or be it when it comes to your compute element. All of that needs to be put in within that element. And we talk about this, and I think one of the famous things which you've said, or which I really, really like the way you've said it, is that the cloud computing space is essentially the data network as we know it, and the networking that goes with it. So what used to be just purely something very tangible, which people could see, own, manage themselves, it's no different to the cloud, because when we talk about the cloud now, it's actually a physical address, but it's just that we don't actually know where that address is. It's not as if it's out there, it's something there which anybody can really grasp, but it's actually a physical address somewhere along. But in this day and age, we don't mind, or we don't care where it's based. But previously, we had to worry about, we have to manage our own data center, and we have to provide all the circuits, all the connections into the data center. Now, a lot of that has been taken away from us, and then we just have to think about, how do I identify what is what, where it is, and where we put it. And I think that is where the networking comes in and becomes such a key component upon which we build our success and and the experience that we have.
It feels that way. And, I like to look at trends because history has a pattern of repeating itself. So first we used leased lines, private lines. Then we used frame relay and ATM. Then what happened is we went to these Ethernet lines again, basically Ethernet private lines. Then it was, wait, we could do a collection of these Ethernet private lines over an MPLS network and create a point to multipoint now it's VPLS. Then it was, wait, VPLS is kind of cool. Let's go back to Ethernet over MPLS, which were private lines again. Then now we're in cloud computing. Now it's a single cloud. Then it's hybrid and multi-clouds. I think that what we're going to see is the data center isn't going to go away. I think we're going to basically be extending these clouds. I think these great public clouds like AWS and Azure and Google, I think they're amazing at what they do. But the latency or the lack of latency in the data center and the ability to compute over bare metal in the data center, I think that's still really exciting. So I think everything in the future is going to go to this, open stack, Nutanix data center combined to multiple clouds. Or Azure is starting to do it, where they're actually allowing the customer to basically run some of their Azure workloads in the customer's data center without paying for the commute. Basically, is a competition to the IBM platform, the OpenStack Ansible platform. So I don't know. Where do you see? Do you see this going back and forth? Where we consistently work to right now. To me, the cloud is like, how do we get the cloud to perform as well as the data center? then I think it's going to be like, wait, the data center is still best for what it's at, but the cloud's best for this. Do you see that evolution, or do you see it differently? And
Oh,
either,
I think it's already here. It's already here. I mean, you talk about Azure. I mean, AWS has the Outpost, which allows your own data centers to be able to run workloads or different kind of sessions which are already in the cloud. I think it's very much here. And what we'll find is that with all this element about centralization and standards coming together, people will be running their own private clouds. Um, and we have the big three or the big four, depending on which region that you are, in Azure, GCP, and AWS, Ali Cloud, or the Oracle Cloud, and a couple others. So you can have about 5 or 6 of these people which are really dominating. But in the end, I think a lot of people right now we're creating their own private clouds, and running that running that with those open standards, which are out there. But I already see that it's already in practice, and I think that some of the very big players have already embraced that concept of knowing that people are still going to keep their data centers, and data centers are still going to go there. But I think in this age now, where we have the climate change, where that energy, the use of energy, the source of energy is becoming very much a key concern. It'll be interesting how that takes place, especially with the commitment to drive down energy usage and go for clean sources of energy. And there are a lot of wonderful companies now who are one of the things which you've noticed is that a lot of data centers now are being opened in areas whereby the clean sources, like you find that they're being opened up in the Arctic Circle, for example, and you find the likes of Facebook, the likes of Google. They have their data centers in the Arctic because they know that the cooling, there's a natural the air there to cool their servers and to keep everything ticking along is there. It's a clean source of energy where they have it, or being close to geothermal sources and all those kind of things. Those will reign supreme in time to come. But to answer your question, definitely the private cloud is still going to feature very heavily for lots of companies.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I've got a lot of experience with blockchain data centers that generate a tremendous amount of heat. And I tried to run one in Florida for a little while. That was interesting. And then I moved it to a place called McPherson, Kansas, where they had really cheap electric for a bunch of people. I was kind of advising them on how to run a blockchain data center. So I love it. Now, that's where you made a point. Now, people come to me and they say, I want to go to the cloud because it's green. And I say, think of the laws of thermodynamics. If your business needs 100 servers and you go to AWS, AWS is going to go buy those same 100 servers. That's not greener. But if they do it in an area where they're able to use geothermal cooling, that's greener. And those are the kind of cool things, because it's kind of like, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, just transformed. So if you've got an electric car, but you need a fossil fuel diesel generator to generate the electric for the car is still powered by diesel. No matter where the electric is coming from, it's still coming from diesel. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. But we can take that heat coming from these systems and we can pull cold air in the Arctic. And yeah, absolutely, that's great. The key is, how hard is it going to be to get the networking there? How hard is it going to be to get the power there? How hard is it going to be to get all that other stuff? And let me tell you from experience, pulling cold air in is great, but the cold air has to get some kind of filter, because I can tell you from past experience, when you do ventilation without substantial filtering in a data center, it does not work out so well. You got a lot of stuff in the data center that you don't want to be in there. And of course, these systems have giant fans and they suck that dirt in. So just a thought that I have a little bit of experience on, which I didn't have this kind of experience, but I do have experience trying to cool things that are taking many, many megawatts of power, and it's not so easy.
I mean, the data center industry has really benefited from I would say cheap connectivity. So the submarine cables which are out there, which are being laid, I mean, that is essentially the cloud. So when we talk about the cloud, you might think, okay, it's up in the sky. But even having said that, I mean, now we're talking about the future. We have other organizations who are looking at creating, networks in, with satellite constellations. So those would be elements right now where they're going to provide an alternative cloud or an alternative internet now using, an atmospheric network as opposed to, an undersea cable network. So that would be quite interesting to see how that goes, and what the uptake would be. Some people are even talking about, using airships which can be on station for a good, for hours or for hours, weeks, or days. Along here, where near I live, is, a hub of airship innovation, and they're looking, at airships to provide that type of that type of feature. So there are lots of exciting things ahead, which people are really thinking outside the box in delivering, these services, for the cloud, and the like. So yeah, we'll have to watch this space very closely and see how it's going. But I mean, it's been great looking at it, and seeing how the innovation is really taking shape.
Yeah, so to me, it's pretty exciting. My production team has told me that I should ask if you're having a good time, if you could hit the like button and type hashtag cloud hired, keeps all the algorithms happy, and everything in the internet is all about algorithms. So if you can help us keep the algorithms happy by typing cloud hired and hitting the like button and subscribing and hitting the bell, those kind of things. Thank you all so much for your allowing me to act like a YouTube person for about 30 seconds there. I do love the power of YouTube. YouTube enables us to be able to communicate and share knowledge for free across the world. So I love that. So help us work with the algorithms so we can do more of the free work and the kind of things that we try and do. So, really love that. So you see it too. So it's kind of interesting. We start off private, then we typically go to a cloud, then we go back to private, then we go back to a cloud, then we start integrating all these environments together, which is where I think we're at right now. And to me, that's exciting. I think we're starting to reach the point where people well, you and I are come from a world where people didn't even know how to use the tech. We'd set up big networks and people would download photos of you don't even want to know, or videos of whatever, or music. I mean, and I got to tell you, when I started out and we'd run sniffers or protocol analyzers, that was all the network. It was illicit photos and it was Napster. And then all of a sudden it was like business traffic. And then it was social media traffic, and then it was business traffic, and then it was a whole lot of business traffic, and now it's e-commerce and some other stuff too. So you now have access to basically 50 years of network professional experience. So if you guys have some questions on networking in the cloud, or how to learn networking for the cloud, or how to tune your cloud career, bring them forth. Akwo's got, almost 20 years of networking experience. I've got, well, let's just say 25. My CCI number is 7417, which is embarrassing because it tells you how old I am, but it also tells you, how long I've been in networking. So please ask some questions. I believe, Jesse, if you go back, I think I saw something coming from Dean a bit ago. I think Dean had the first question there. It was going back a little while because I asked everybody to, so let's see. I think Dean, Jesse, he put a Q in front of it. I think I saw one coming in. Okay, Dean Haycox, the question was, are they relying too much on automation and not enough on fundamentals? So let me translate that. So Dean, I got to tell you, in my experience, you must focus on the fundamentals of everything. Whether it's emergency services, where it's airway, breathing, circulation that you look at prior to looking at things, or when it actually comes to designing your systems. Personally, I want to get Akwo's perspective. I like to start at the basics and the fundamentals for everything. Maybe it's because my family's Greek and we use the first principles approach to everything, where you start at the bottom and then you work your way up. But that's my perspective. But Akwo, What's your perspective of the fundamentals? Do you think we've gotten too far away from the fundamentals, too much into automation, or you think it's a natural place to marry the two?
I would think it's a natural place to marry the two. I think the fundament. I think the you can't. Somebody has to set up the automation, and in order to do that, you need to understand the fundamentals. In fact, it will not make any sense to you if you don't even know if you don't know the fundamentals. So by the time you want to even set up the automation, if you haven't had that foundation, then you won't be able to use it. So I'll say the two go hand in hand. There's no going away around it. You'll have to understand some of the fundamentals in order to make some headway in this.
Yeah, and I think that's really a great perspective. How do you automate what you don't understand? And how do you design what you don't understand? So you're going to have those strong fundamentals to be able to design something or automate it. I think that's a great question you asked, Dean, and I kind of agree with it. If you don't have the fundamentals, what are you automating? So great point. Who else has a question? Tech Wiz Mufaz. Is DevOps part of the job because the world is growing so fast towards automation? Tech with Mufaz. I'm going to answer this one. DevOps is its own career, and it is a wonderful career. Architecture is system design in its own career. DevOps is like, DevOps to me is for example, like what a veterinarian does. And architecture, for example, is what a physician does. They're both in the practice of medicine, but one takes care of animals and one takes care of humans. Very different. So, for example, I have somebody that wanted to be an architect, and the family was saying become a DevOps engineer. And I was saying, tell that person if they want DevOps to become DevOps. If you want to be an architect, come be an architect. Don't try to become a nurse by learning to fly an airplane. And I know you've been guided to do this, but DevOps is such a different career compared to architecture, which is design. It's like learning to fly an airplane on the way to be a nurse or a doctor. It's a totally unrelated career. So as an architect, you should know the automation that exists. You should know what those DevOps tools are. You should understand what DevOps engineers do. But no, if you want to be a cloud architect, learn to be a cloud architect. But if you want to be a DevOps engineer, go learn to be a DevOps engineer. Both are great careers, and I encourage you to do whatever will make you happy. But learn the career that you desire and go be the best that you can at that one career. And Tech with Mufaz, the world will come looking for you when you're that good. Build a brand, have a laser-like focus. If you want to do cloud security, do cloud security. You want to do cloud architecture, do cloud architecture. You want to do cloud networking, go do cloud networking. Pick one thing and go be so great at it. That's my recommendation for you. Do you have any guidance there, Akwo, as well?
Well, I'm not going to add too much to what you've already said, but I'll say that the foundations of IP addressing, it doesn't matter whether you're going to go into DevOps or into cloud architecture. You got to know that it's not going to be too onerous for you to get to master. There's some few things there, such as subnetting, classless interdomain routing, which, yes, they'll take you some time to master. But once you understand what the concepts, what they're trying to achieve, it would make things very much clearer for you. And I think it's a good thing, because I mean, once you do see some of those notations and things like that, you instantly recognize it. Then you know that, okay, you're in the right place. So yeah, just keep an open mind out there. Learn some of these fundamentals. So if and when they decide to automate it, then at least you understand. If at all you've got to troubleshoot, the automation process, then you actually know what you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's really good. That's industry knowledge of what's going on. But, Tech with Mufaz, as Akwo said, that networking piece, those CIDR notations, that addressing scheme, that is a really critical skill. And I got to tell you, when I interview people, and I've interviewed 1,000 AWS certified people, it's very rare to find someone that knows that. And those people that know that are the ones that are hireable. And the people that don't have those fundamental skills are very hard to hire. So make sure you master those fundamental skills. I'm a martial artist. I like what Bruce Lee said. Bruce Lee said, "I don't fear the man that practiced 10,000 kicks once. He said, I fear the man that practiced one kick 10,000 times. Be the best at your one thing. And tech with Mufaz, not only will you be great, but the world will come look for you because you will be so capable, and capable people that are focused, that are experts, can solve a company's problems. And when you become that great at one thing, the world will look for you. So that's my recommendation for you. That's what I advise my students, and that's personally what I've done throughout my career. Manaz, for a non-tech background, where do you start learning networking from? Good question. So Manaz, my students, we do teach networking. Each time we do an architecture, we're teaching some BGP or something. For a non-tech background, where do you learn networking from? Quite frankly, the easiest thing that I would do is I would pick up a Cisco Certified Network Associate book. Right then and there, it's written by Cisco. It's got an overall good knowledge. It'll teach a little bit about switching, meaning VLANs. It'll teach about VLAN tagging, VLAN trunking. It'll teach basic intro to the junior level routing protocols like an intro to OSPF. It'll teach spanning tree, which you need to know. It'll teach NAT. It'll teach you basically the networking technologies, and it will actually teach you things. So I would say the Cisco, the CCNA would be good. Another great place that I like is, there are 4 books that I think every network engineer or architect should have. And one of it is called Internet Routing Architectures by Bassam Halabi. The other 2 are Routing TCP/IP, volumes 1 and 2 by Jeff Doyle. The last book is Stevens TCP/IP. These are the best books that I know in networking. Don't get me wrong, I've read about 40 more than that, but those 4 pretty much will give everybody a good intro to networking. And that intro to networking, these 4 books, will basically be enough to have a great cloud career. How about you? You've been in this industry for 20 years, Akwo. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, Cisco is the outlier out there. They are the standard. I would say that there are other people such as Juniper. They've got some good training programs. There's a like of Aruba or HP. And if you want something which is really vendor neutral, maybe you could go for CompTIA, the Network Plus, to get to understand. So at least you get the fundamentals of it. So if you don't want to go to do anything really vendor specific, you could do it that way. There are some, a couple of very much independent sources as well which you might be worth looking at. I would say if you can do some kind of a lecture-based or a lecture-based element, it will be good. Maybe from the likes of certain providers such as Learning Tree, for example, as an alternative. So if you don't want to do anything from a vendor point of view, then look at some of these vendor neutral providers. So CompTIA is a good one. Learning Tree is another one. So take it from there.
Sounds great. And then Jesse, let's get really quick to Volk's 1337 question, because I think there's a lot before that. So the question that I saw was next. It actually is a question on object storage versus a NoSQL database. So Volk 1337, these 2 aren't really related. So S3 is a type of object storage, which is a type of storage area network that takes data, breaks it down into objects. Now, you'll typically hear of object storage like S3 in a big data environment, because what happens is the object storage actually does have metadata associated with the data. So because of that, it can be put into data lakes and other big data environments. Now, Cassandra is a NoSQL database, which is what you use when you need a very big database. And there's a lot of different NoSQL databases. They're databases that basically have a more flexible schema and scale much better and faster than relational databases such as MySQL. But your NoSQL databases with things like MongoDB, Apache Cassandra, DynamoDB, Google Cloud Bigtable, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not really in the same families or even the same kind of things. One is where you store things that you're going to be sharing, like software, and the other is basically where you're going to store things about like a game player state or someone's state in Netflix. I have lots of clients that are still using Hadoop clusters in big data environments. Lots and lots of them. Definitely not dead in any of the kind of big data customers that we would ever deal with. But a lot of people, there's cloud services, but a lot of people want to use their own. So just wanted to make sure that we address the S3 versus Cassandra. And then Jesse, go to the next one, wherever that is. This question is from Dean. Hey, Cox. Hi, Akwo. I'm looking to be a cloud security architect. Do you have any advice to work in telecommunications?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, the fundamentals of, cybersecurity really depend on the networking. So the networking really is the building block. Look at it as kind of like the house or the physical, the building itself. And, as the cybersecurity architect, you'll be there, like, understanding, what kind of locks to use, what kind of windows to use there, and all those other things. So definitely, I would advise having a good foundation there on networking. So within the telecommunications industry, the always start for that would come down to the device called the firewall, and there are many different firewall providers there. So the firewall really is kind of it's in the name itself. It provides some kind of a description. So when you have a wall on fire, then it's kind of like a barrier that stops bad, that stops somebody from actually going through. So not, to paint a picture, you watch Game of Thrones or you've watched all these things, you've always find that it's a good form of defense, whereby when somebody sees a wall on fire, they're not going to go through that. So having mastery in devices such as that is always a good thing. And it is something which the telecommunications industry would value very much. And then on the other side of that, on the same equation around that, you'll have other kind of tools and assets such as intrusion detection and intrusion prevention that would come in, and your ability as well to use other things such as your ability to actually identify the particular type of packets or the particular type of payloads or applications which are out there. You have then tools such as SolarWinds for a vendor that provides that. You have the likes of other elements such as NetScout that also provides those types of services. And in addition to you got the huge giants such as the Palo Altos, the Fortinets, which are out there that really deliver custom cybersecurity solutions, which are not only delivered in the physical form, where you can have it in a package, but you could also have that in the cloud. You also hear of organizations such as Checkpoint Technologies, very big too in these spaces. So either Palo Alto, Fortinet, Checkpoint, Cisco, Juniper, which have also made a name. So you'd find that these people are all making provide something which is in the physical domain, and also in the virtual domain, in the cloud element. There are other areas such as proxy services that come into play, whereby you're kind of like masking the true origin of what you want. Encryption standards, which all fall in. So there's a good foundation for you to build on, and I think that any of the training that you get with some of the vendors which I mentioned anyway is a good foundation to set you up in the telecommunications industry, definitely. So great question, Dean.
And Akwo, I think that's an excellent answer. Dean, make sure you understand the cloud stuff, because if you don't understand the cloud, you don't know what you're securing. And understand the network, because the network has a big impact on security. And the funny thing is, most security people don't even know. So for example, if you don't have a route to a destination, you can't hack it. So there's a lot of things that can be done on the networking side, such as route filtering on the QoS side, rate limiting. There's a lot of things that can be done. 802.1x authentication, for example. So Dean, you actually have a very good security background in your history. I know your history. You've got 10 years of what looks really awesome on a security background. So I'd say focus on that. I would also say make sure you get some good, strong networking background, and I know you're doing it. And then I'd say learn those firewalls, those IDS, IPS systems, those anti-malware systems. Learn how all the systems work together as part of the architecture, like Akwo said. And I think you're going to be in a great position, Dean. A really great position. Jesse, if you want to bring in the next one. Dimson Mentor. What next await cloud architects? What areas can a cloud architect pursue? Basically the career path. Okay, I'll take this one. So Dimson Mentor, I'm going to walk you through from the cloud engineer all the way to the business architect. Since this is my world and I've done all these roles. So the cloud engineer, Dimson, is going to be this deeply, deeply, deeply technical, the super smart technical person, the person that loves the tech, that's going to build everything and know all about how to go build it. Right above that, you're going to have something called a technical solution architect. Now, a technical solution architect is almost not even an architect. They're really a fancy engineer. This is the technical solution architect is an engineer that's so good, you don't know what to do with them. So you call him a technical solution architect. It gives you the ability to pay him 30% more. These are still basically engineers that do a little bit of design. They focus exclusively on the technical piece. That's a senior engineer, but they call it a technical solution architect. One level up is the solution architect. And what I mean by one level up is with each level up, you're getting an increase in pay substantially, but you're also getting less technical. One level up as the solution architect, which would be somebody that's an expert on AWS or an expert on Azure. The level above that would be the cloud architect, which is someone that basically is going to design an end-to-end solution for the customer across the clouds. This is a very good job here. Now, once we get above that, we hit the enterprise architect world. Enterprise architects, and I've done this, is a great job. At the enterprise architect, you spend most of your time with the C-level executives, most of your time with the organization executives, and it's about transforming the business with technologies. So you'll be looking at cloud technologies, non-cloud technologies, applications, literally anything that you can do tech-wise to try and improve the business's performance, change workflows, business processes, and such. Now, after you've done that, and that's a great job, it is a very, very high-paying job. It's typically a director-level job, so you can see what goes along with that. There is the opportunity to do business architect work, which is what I've done as well. In business architect work, we think about how do we redesign the business to optimize the business's performance. What processes can we change? What workflows do we change? And of course, when you're redesigning a business, what helps you redesign the processes and workflows? The tech. So even as a business architect, we're going to be working with enterprise architects and cloud architects to help design the technology solution to transform the business. So Dimson Mentor, the two options are go from the cloud architect to the distinguished architect to the enterprise architect to the business architect, or go from cloud architect to like manager, director, VP, CIO, CTO. And because a lot of these architect roles are already manager level or director level roles, it's pretty easy to do so. So Gibbs and Akwo, they're basically your two paths with the students that I work with all the time. Akwo, I'll let you answer that as well.
Yeah, not too much to add there. I think you just about covered it. But I think that if you want to stay within this environment, I think one of the things that you can also consider is to become very much a specialist. So you'll find an area, you become, which is a niche area. So you can either decide to go into data analytics, into the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example, become an expert there. There are a number of industries that would truly value that in that respect. You can also look at cybersecurity, which Dean would be doing, for example, or even go into networking, which that's my background. And if at all you have a very, if you look at your background and you find that, you find something that where you're naturally inclined or you're interested in, pursue that. So I think that that's a very good way of, forming your own niche and then building your own brand along that area. Well, but apart from that, if you don't want to do that, then you go higher up into management. Then you can go into the business side of things where you're doing the business development or into the marketing, which are also two very much highly prized and highly sought after areas as well.
Yeah, and that's my advice. Specialize in something. Find one thing and go be great at it. Learn everything you can. Learn, make it about networking, security, big data, or focus on an industry. Maybe you worked in a bank for the last 30 years and focus on cloud architectures for banking. That makes you a subject matter expert. Maybe you worked for service providers like Vodafone or BT. Focus on solutions for service providers. Realistically speaking, what we're talking about here is be great at one thing. Don't be a 10x AWS certified person. Be great at one thing, but really mentor, be really, really great about it. Do that and you'll be highly successful. Jesse, if you want to bring in the next one. Jesse Murdoch, great question. If you want to be cloud hard, you should learn networking. So here's the thing. And in fact, in 2 weeks, on the week of the 9th, based upon whatever you guys tell us, we're having a voting thing. And Jesse, if you want to put a link to the vote, we're going to be teaching a CCNA course or an AWS Advanced Networking course, completely free and live on this YouTube channel. So Jesse, if you want to put the voting link. But after that, we got a couple of cool free things. I would say learn networking. So I will tell you that if you study Cisco networking, you're going to learn a lot more networking than you will with the AWS Advanced Networking. The AWS Advanced Networking, in my mind, is a very junior introductory intro to networking. But what I like about the AWS Advanced Networking is if you know networking already, like Akwo or me, it shows you how to do the networking things that we already know on the AWS cloud. And that is very valuable. So it really depends where you're coming from, Jesse. If you're a network architect like me, that advanced networking is kind of cool. But if you're brand new, that's not going to give you any knowledge to actually do the actual job. That's not deep enough. It's too junior. So it depends. It's any certification is based upon where you're at in your life, Jesse, and what you need to achieve out of it. A certification is a tool, like a hammer. Sometimes you need to create a bunch of certifications to make up for a lack of experience on a resume. And if so, we do it. Sometimes you don't need a certification, but it's a matter of, optimize what you need to get the job. So what I would say is learn the Cisco to learn the networking. The AWS Advanced Networking is how to do the networking things that you actually learn. So if you want to be cloud hired as an engineer, that AWS Advanced Networking is really important because you're going to be doing it. If you want to be a cloud architect, the Cisco networking is a little more important, but if you have the Cisco networking and the AWS networking, now you know how to do the networking things on the AWS cloud. So it's a combination of both, Jesse. But it was a great question you asked there, Jesse. Thank you. Wasim, if you could quantify experience or level of knowledge from one position to another in the hierarchy, how would you present it? Excellent question. So, cloud engineer, most knowledge of how to do the things, most deeply technical. Second, well, probably equally technical, is the technical solution architect, very deeply technical. Solution architect, 50% technical, 50% business executive. Cloud architect, 60% business executive, 40% technical. Enterprise architect, 70% technical, 70% business, 30% technical. Business architect, 100% business, like 5% technical. So it really depends where you're at. What I will tell you, Wasim, is if you're trying to optimize your career progression, if you're trying to optimize your salary, don't do it with technical skills. Now, I know that's going to sound really strange, but if you're trying to build your best technical career, it's not your technical skills that are going to do it. Your technical skills, let's say, here's the hierarchy from the bottom to the top. Your technical skills will get you this far. But what's going to take you from here to here is related to your soft skills, your emotional intelligence, your executive presence, your enthusiasm, your attitude, your likability, your business acumen, your ability to take a business problem and understand it, the ability to sell. These are the things that really, Wasim, are going to give you the bigger long-term boost. So, the point is at your earliest, the more engineering jobs, more tech, the higher paying, more architecture jobs are much more business. But it's competency, not experience. And experience and competency are two different things. Competency pertains to the ability to do the job. Experience is how long you've been doing something. So you can have a doctor that's been working as a doctor for 50 years. That's terrible. The doctor was terrible when they began, and they were terrible 50 years later. Or you can have a doctor that got fresh out of medical school with zero experience that's really good. Now, if it's me, I'm going to go to the person that's really good. I don't care whether they have experience or not. I want the smart one. But same thing as in tech. I've interviewed, pretend you're the hiring manager was seeing. We've got a 14-year-old that just broke into the Pentagon, that also just broke into the UK's most secret systems. They broke into MI5, they broke into MI6, and they're inside of the CIA, the Pentagon, MI5, and MI6, and they're 14 years old. I have that person. And then I've got a 40-year-old with 15 years of cybersecurity experience that's not that good. Who's getting hired? The 14-year-old that can hack into the Pentagon and MI5 and MI6 and the CIA. So competency always matters most. Remember, there's a process. You use recruiters. You do things to get in front of the hiring manager. It's competency that wins. Akwo, I'll turn this over to you. Second half.
Yeah, that's a great response, Mike. I'm not going to add too much to that. I would say that from my experience, I have come for a situation whereby I've very much been in front on customer-facing roles, and a lot of times you'd have to judge things depending on your audience. You have to understand that not everybody is fully up to speed with the technical jargon, and so you really have to know who your audience is in that regard. There's some cases whereby technical competency and technical your ability to carry out the technical work is highly prized. So in that kind of settings and in those kind of individual settings, you have to, you can carry out a discussion. But in most settings whereby, lots of people don't even know the detail, it's imperative that you're able to communicate and convey the information that you need to get across, or even find out what you're trying to do by having a conversation at the level which the person who's in front of you is comfortable with. So that's just something that in time you have to build up. What I've found is that by knowing the technical and also being able to ask probing questions, the responses that you get back can help you then translate that into a technical, give you a technical map about how to proceed, and vice versa. So if you can take a technical kind of situation as well and then put it into the layman's language, that's also too highly prized, because I think people by and large try to make things simple and want to keep things as simple as possible. So having a technical experience is great, but being able to keep it simple and convey information to the level that suits your specific audience is the prize.
So, I think that's so important. I'm holding up a book here. This is a book. I had just finished my MBA program. I was working at Cisco. I got promoted to the strategy consulting team where I was the lead architect for the entire healthcare industry. And I was having a lot of fun. I give a speech. It was in front of a huge audience, and I had an executive coach and a mentor that was in there. And she says to me at the end of the speech, "Michael, would you mind if I sent you a book?" And I said, "No, I'd be honored." And this is the book that showed up. It was this Why Business People Speak Like Idiots. And when I read the book, and I know exactly what she said, she had written me this long email, and she said, "I know you're going to read it in 3 seconds." She said, "I'm sending you this email, and you are not allowed to read it until you read the book and then read this." I had strung together every piece of jargon, every buzzword you can possibly imagine. And it was all there, and I sounded super educated, but nobody knew a word that I was actually talking about. It was like, so realistically speaking, these are the kind of things that tend to spook me. So the point is put it in plain language. Akwo, like you said, it will change everything. No jargon. What is it? Get rid of all the vendor marketing. Get rid of words like elastic. Get rid of words like cloud, and actually describe what it is. And I think, the customers love you. I think you gave him the best advice, Akwo. Thank you. Jesse, you want to bring in the next one? Julian Kinney. Well, this one I have to deal with, Akwo, because I've got little bit of experience here. Julian Kenya, what advice coming from a surgical nurse background you're actually interested in networking? So, Julian, there's a reason I wanted to take this question. I am a nurse practitioner. My first master's degree is in nursing. I had my own internal medicine office before I went into technology. So, here's what I did, and here's what I don't recommend you do. And then I'll tell you what I did do. So the first thing that I did when I wanted to move into networking is I became a Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. I took a CCNP program and I became a CCDP. So I had 3 professional certifications, and then I literally applied for a job and I didn't get hired. So then what I did next is I started asking employers and recruiters, what do you want in a network engineer? What do you want in a network architect? So here's the thing, Julian. You are actually in a really great position as an actual nurse. Now, as a nurse, and it's less as a surgical nurse than a traditional nurse, but still as a surgical nurse, you have to deal with patients. Before they go to sleep, patients are scared. So if you're there prior to the anesthesia, when they're scared, takes a fair amount of emotional intelligence and empathy to try and take care of the patients. As a surgical nurse, you often have to deal with the patient's family, who's petrified about what's going on with their loving family member. And you have to communicate these things. Again, this is a very strong asset. As a nurse, in general, you have to ask a lot of questions. And some of these questions that you have to ask the patients or their patients' family members are very challenging questions, and they're very personal questions, the kind of questions that people don't like to answer. And a lot of people's problems are self-inflicted. And you, as a nurse, have to be super emotionally intelligent to ask those questions in an open-minded, non-judgmental way. So, Julian, they are your strengths. They are your superpowers coming out of healthcare. Keep those things. Remember those things, that consultative approach. And as a nurse, you have to triage what's most important. And as a nurse, you have to rely on your baseline knowledge in your head. Lots of knowledge in there, lots of acumen. And then you have to make decisions based upon the whole picture. So when you really think about what a nurse actually does, interact with the client, ask some questions, assess the patient, generate a hypothesis, and then follow a treatment plan. Or if the treatment plan that's been prescribed by the physician isn't working, call the physician and say, I think you need to add X, Y, Z drug. That's what you're doing as a nurse. That's kind of exactly what we do as architects. So what I would say is if you're interested in networking, learn networking. Get great at networking. Learn routing and switching. It's the fundamentals. Learn it from Cisco. Go get that CCNA. Go get that CCNP. And you know what? Go be a CCIE. Really take that networking thing to the top. But that's your technical piece. Realize those other things that you've got from nursing, those communication skills, that is your secret weapon. That will separate you from the rest of the technology professionals. So know that, because what's going to happen is when you transition careers or when you interview for a job, I want you to think of it from the hiring manager's perspective. 50% of what we interview you for is related to your technical competency. And the other 50% of what we care about is your attitude, your energy, your enthusiasm, your communication skills. So master all those communication things, Julian, that nurses are great at when you go on those interviews, and then bring up your technical capabilities to as good as you're going to get them, which hopefully gets you to a 40 out of 50. You do those two and you can get some wonderful network engineering jobs. And when it comes to it, in network engineering, they assume we're all cranky people sitting behind a desk. We're not. Be the likable, be the outgoing, be that nurse, bring out the best in everyone. Watch your career rise. That's what I suggest for you, Julian. And I hope I answered your question. If you've got more, please ask it, and I'd love to answer it. Jesse, you can bring in the next one. Carl Kenya, so happy to have you here. I'm so thrilled you can appreciate our analogies. And I think you're on vacation pretty close to where I'm at right now. So thanks for tuning in while you're on vacation, Kenya, Carl. Shake, I am a businessman. How can I start my own IT company to provide cloud-related services? How can I get clients? Well, Shake, question first is, do you know cloud? Because if you're going to start a business, you probably should have some really solid skills in the business you're starting. If you don't have really solid skills in the business you're starting, your cloud engineers, your cloud architects, your DevOps professionals, and all of those people will be doing things and you won't be able to manage them. So the next question would be is, if you know cloud and you know business acumen, because you've got, and you know design skills, and you've got sales skills, and you've got marketing skills, and you've got the right leadership skills, what business are you in? Are you already in tech? Meaning, do you have clients in tech? Do you have people that you know in tech, for example? If so, reach out to them. If you are not in tech and you want to move to tech, I think you need to work in tech for a couple of years to actually know the industry. It's hard to run a business if you don't know the industry. I've seen people that try to run a medical business that are not doctors that destroy the businesses in a matter of months because they don't know the business they're actually moving. So you need to have some industry acumen in the business. So Sheikh, let's assume you already know cloud, or networking or data center work. So I'm going to assume you have lots of expertise in there, because otherwise I'm going to recommend that you develop those expertise first, learn the skills, work in it for a couple of years. After that, how do you start your own company? Well, assuming you're working in the industry, you're going to develop context. If you're an architect, you're going to be consulting with CEOs every single day of the week, CIOs, CTOs, VPs, SVPs. After 2 or 3 years as an architect or in the tech business, you're going to have a Rolodex of hundreds and thousands of people that you can call and say, I've got a company. But you've got to prove yourself first, or the only way that you could get away without that would be to hire a bunch of big, high-profile cloud architects, people like me that have been on the board of directors, and get a bunch of people like that, build a team, and then have the team advise you, and then have that team go out there and help you build things. But somewhere along the line, you're going to have industry context, you're going to have industry knowledge, and you're going to have to be relevant. So for you to be relevant to the CEO of another business, and the CEO of another business, and trust me, as a CEO, you're going to be meeting with other CEOs 15, 20, 30 times a week. You've got to be able to transform their business. So you have to have enough knowledge and acumen for you and your team to actually do that. So Sheikh, if you've got them, those skills, sure. And if you wanted us to do strategy consulting on a business, we do that option. We have planning sessions on our website, because we could do that and help you do it. But that would be the process. It's not going to be just something where you just open a door one day and say, I'm a cloud consulting firm. Now, that's my perspective. If you've got a different perspective, Akwo, I'd love to hear it.
No, not really. I'd say a business is a totally different ball game. Having the base knowledge is great, but for a business, you'll need to have some very specific skills, and I think people skills is key. Mm-hmm. So that's all I can say. I've not opened a business before, but I'd say that you have to just be good in sales.
Good in sales is a huge, huge thing. But it also helps. Like, it's pretty easy for me. I can make a phone call to executives at any one of the cloud providers, and it makes life real easy because I have those contacts. But if I didn't have those contacts, it would be really, really hard. So that's what I'm saying. Get some industry contacts, or get someone on your team that has them. Jesse, you want to bring in the next one? Wasim, I have a network engineer background. That's great. And came to be introduced to the cloud with VMware. Now you're an infrastructure DevOps engineer. Great. On AWS, I have a strong feeling that the business is pushing you to be pushing the dev part of DevOps. Well, DevOps are development people. So for people that really want to do DevOps, it's really critical for them to be really great developers. Development, DevOps, architecture, they're kind of opposites. To be an architect, we're not going to be coding, configuring, we're going to be designing. On the DevOps side, having the development skills are critical. In fact, when people say, Mike, I want a DevOps engineer, should I get certified? I said, not unless you're a developer first. Got to be a dev part before you can do the DevOps part. That's my perspective, but it's up to you. I'll pass it over to you, Akwo.
Don't have much experience with DevOps, so can't really give you much insight there as it is. But
totally fair.
That's
completely appropriate. Lenny, Do companies hire cloud architects as a freelancer? The answer is yes. If so, what is the average man-hour rate for an entry-level cloud architect? So, Lenny, companies do hire cloud architects as a freelancer. Hourly rate really varies. I mean, if you're really good, you can get $250 plus to $400 per hour. If you're new, an hourly rate is going to be about $80 to $120 per hour. Now, the key is if you're new, getting that hourly rate. Generally speaking, the consulting roles, the freelancer roles are typically for people that are better with lots of experience. So it'd be typically speaking, the freelancer roles is somebody needs me to go do their cloud networking, but they don't need me for a year. They need me for 3 months because they need somebody coming in like that. So most of the freelance work is typically by people that are really experienced. But Lenny, there's also sometimes some organizations that do contract to hire where they're going to test someone by giving them a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract. And if they do a good job, be hired. And if it's a contract to hire position, Lenny Octavia, then the pay rate will probably be much lower because they're going to try and get it at parity. So it really depends on how you actually do this freelance work. If you're doing it, it can be sky high, the hourly rates, if it's a short thing where they're looking for an expert. Because even if an organization pays $300 an hour for 1,000 hours to get somebody to do one thing, it's cheaper than them for basically to hire somebody and have to hold on to them forever. Remember, as an architect, it's not about the build, it's about the transformation. If you design a $1 billion solution that saves a company $3 billion a year, you've made the company $2 billion. So the man-hour rate, as you put it, is based upon the transformation and the value that you can bring to the business. It's not based upon your title, it's based upon the value you can bring. So that's why it's all over the place. It's going to be based upon your skills and your transformational ability and what you can convince the customer your capabilities are on that interview. Huge variability in terms of the pay for these things. And Akwo, if you have any guidance there as well.
No, I think that answer that you've given is great, Mike.
Wonderful. Okay, Jesse, want to bring in the next one? Abigail Marks. Hi, guys. How long would you say it takes to greatly improve emotional intelligence? Well, really solid question. I will give you a personal example, but Abigail, I'm going to tell you this. This is going to be one of those individually dependent things. We all learn differently. I can tell you when I was in nursing school, a long time ago, I was in there with the greatest girl in the world, my fiance, who's been my wife now for the last 25 years. And I can remember that she and I were in there and all these other people were in there and they called it therapeutic communication, which was emotional intelligence training. I can remember, like, by the end of the day, everybody in the class was actually getting along better than they did before the emotional intelligence. So some of it, I think, comes on fast. But just because you can learn certain things fast doesn't mean they become part of your life unless you practice them every day for a while. So I would say it probably takes you about 6 months, 4 to 6 months to start to really gain these skills. Abigail, you may be wondering, since you're one of my students, and a lot of times I get new students and the students are like, I'm in week 1, where's all the tech? And I'm like, we'll get to the tech a couple weeks into it. But I got to start the emotional intelligence, presentation skills, soft skills. I start that all really fast, Abigail. And the reason I start it all up front is that's the hardest part to learn is these skills. So I would say it takes about 4 to 6 months to really start to get them. But some people, just some people, Abigail, can pick this stuff up in minutes after they're being taught. There are some people that are naturally very emotionally intelligent. Akwo is extremely emotionally intelligent. I noticed it from the first conversation he and I had maybe 6 months ago. I was like, wow, this guy's really, what's he done? What kind of architecture work has he done? What kind of sales has he done? What kind of leadership has done? Because it struck me instantly as I heard it. So what's your perspective there, Akwo?
Oh, wow, that's a really great question, Abigail. And I've really benefited from some very great training courses as part of the companies that I've had the privilege of working with. And what you end up finding is that, especially if you go through sales training, and I think that's one thing I would recommend anybody to do. If you ever have the opportunity to do any form of sales training, please do take it. Even if you're not even if you're not a salesperson, but you really learn a lot about people anyway. And I think if you're somebody that you're naturally empathetic, and you are a good listener, at least you're half step of the way. And then you'll be taught some techniques around there. And one of the things which, one of the things you're always trying to achieve there is to try and get to the heart of the matter, within the constraints of the time that you have. And there's one acronym which it's a simple one which I'll use, called SPIN: situation, problem, implication, need. So that's a short form of whereby you're trying to digest what a particular type of scenario that you're dealing with a person, when you're interacting with them. There are other acronyms there, which in sales acronyms, like things like Scotsman, depending on what version that you use. So I'd say that being able to, with all the technical background knowledge that you have, and then with some of these sales skills where you're knowing how to probe and ask the right type of questions, listening to what keeps them around, because the most important thing is to get to understand what keeps the client awake, or keeps them, stops them from sleeping, or really concerns them. And sales training is a very beautiful way of doing that. And if you're able to combine the two, your sales training and your technical knowledge, it will be, I mean, it's really, really a great way of doing it. So if you ever have the opportunity, I would advise sales training is a way of doing it, of building that emotional intelligence.
And I think, Akwo, that is the absolute best advice I've heard all day. Learn sales, learn sales, learn sales. As an architect, we have to sell the client. As an architect, we have to convince the people inside of our organization to give us the resources to do our job. I would say, sales are necessary for every component that we do. And how do you become great at sales? You solve customer problems. How do you solve customer problems? You find out, like Akwo said, what's keeping them up at night. What are their challenges? What are their pain points? And then you create a creative solution to go solve those problems. Now, I talk about that in the context of architecture. And then I say, as architects, you need to learn sales. Management consulting, sales, architecture, it's the same job. Nothing changes. The difference is what we know. As the architect, we know more about the tech than the salesperson, but our consulting process is still the same. If you've got a management consultant and we're doing business strategy consulting, same process. Start with the client. What are their goals? Baseline the organization systems. What's going on with their business processes? We make an assessment and we make a plan. Cloud architect, ask the business, what are your goals? What are your pain points? Assess the system. Evaluate the system, make an assessment, and build a plan. All of it is the same. And guess what? Sales, love it, Akwo. Learn sales. We probably should be popping that on the screen that says learn sales, but we can skip on that. Let's go to the next one. Great answer, Akwo. I'm so grateful you answered it that way. Great advice. Baron Bhutan. As a cloud engineer, do you need to have experience with DevOps tools such as Terraform, Jenkins, CloudFormation, because you keep getting them on interviews? As a cloud engineer, Baron, you must know all of these skills. Now, you may hear me say that cloud architects or designers, they design, don't configure. Architects don't code, architects don't configure, and architects don't use Terraform. Engineers are builders. So Baron, is a cloud engineer, you're going to need to know Python. You're going to need to be an expert on configuring these things. You're going to need to be an expert on the CLI, the API, the management console, tools like Terraform, terms like Ansible, Jenkins. CloudFormation, I think you can probably get away with skipping these days. CloudFormation, in my mind, is going away. CloudFormation was the AWS way of auto-deploy your things. Going single cloud like just AWS is going by the wayside, so things are moving towards Terraform. So I'd say get really great at Terraform and be good enough at CloudFormation, because I don't think you're going to be doing a lot of CloudFormation moving forward. But I would definitely say this, Baron, all these things are completely required for the cloud engineer. So yes.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing there, is that what we'll get to see within this cloud space is, the adoption of standards. So we're going to move from, purely proprietary services such as CloudFormation, such as Deployment Manager for GCP, for example, and go to these open standards. So Terraform there is a tool which it's platform agnostic.
Exactly.
You see, Ansible as well, to platform agnostic, and I think that's why a lot of people are asking for it, because it doesn't matter what it is. And I think one of the things which Mike, that you've done so brilliantly here in terms of helping us is really making us understand. Understand the principles, understand the fundamentals. So no matter what platform that you go to, you can just simply look at the equivalent and you can just, head off. And it's what we found in networking as well, that there are a lot of standards. Those people, those vendors and companies that dealt with open standards are the ones that are flourishing today. Those that still remain with our proprietary standards, they're not doing that. So even big companies like Microsoft right now have embraced the open source. IBM, they've embraced the open source. So yeah, these tools are, just simply convey that fact that, of open standards, of openness, interoperability.
I think open standards are everything. And when I look at IBM and its evolution over the years, and IBM is an impressive company. First, they just made the tech. Then they were consulting. Then they made the tech. Now they're consulting. Now I got to tell you, that IBM cloud offering, that OpenStack Ansible cloud, American Express is using it, American Airlines is using it, Verizon is using it. Pretty much everybody who's anybody is using that OpenStack cloud. I got to tell you, I'm running it in my house. I've got 3 24-core servers that has the OpenStack cloud running on it. Now, I don't have a lot of cloud dependent workloads, but I just love the cloud so much. And I love that OpenStack cloud so much. And we're in the process of creating a Linux course for the cloud computing community. And I have one of the people at Red Hat who came from Red Hat. I coached him many years ago. Then he took a great career at Red Hat. And he's in the process of doing this. So now I've got all these clouds running around and all this cool Linux stuff in my house. It's all about open standards. Open standards is everything. And I think that's the thing. I think Cisco embraced it. I think IBM embraced it. I think the big tech companies embraced it. Look at what Red Hat has done for the world. Look at SUSE, what they've done in Europe. I mean, even Ubuntu now, that went from like a hobbyist grade Linux that would crash on my desktop every 5 minutes to, being a massive, massive, powerful server. So it's exciting times in the open space for me. Jesse, you want to bring in the next one? Tide. Would I say it's harder to become a DevOps engineer or an architect? I would actually I truly believe in my heart that it's about 3 times harder to become a DevOps engineer than an actual architect. Because to become a DevOps engineer, first thing you have to learn is should be a really good developer first. And that takes a long time to become a really good developer. And then after that, you need to learn the DevOps tools. So I believe DevOps is an excellent career. But I think to really become a great DevOps engineer, it's going to be a lot harder because first you have to become a developer and then you become a DevOps engineer. Where with the architect, you need to learn system design and the business things. So here's the thing, Tide. If learning design is interesting to you and learning ROI modeling is interesting to you and learning sales is interesting to you and learning the business component is interesting to you, then it's going to be easier to become an architect. If by comparison you love to code and you love to sit behind a desk and you don't like to talk to people, the DevOps architect world is better. So I don't think it's which one is easier or harder. I think it's a matter of which one's going to make you happy. Now, I will tell you this. As you get more technical, what your potential for career advancement decreases dramatically. And why is when you're technical, you're the actual back office staff that goes and builds it. Now, I got to tell you this, Tide. Nothing happens without the smart, critical back office staff. They are what makes everything work. So I'm going to make sure that I say how much I value the back office, because without them, we've got nothing. Now, what happens is you've got a glitzy architect. They put on a good suit. They go interact with a client. The architect brings in a $300 million deal to the company. Of that $300 million deal, there's $100 million of profitability for the company. That architect just helped bring in $100 million. You, the DevOps engineer, are an expense. They're paying you to do stuff. They're paying them to bring money into the business. So when you're on that architecture side, don't be surprised if over the course of your career you earn 2 and 3 and 4 times the amount of money than if you were a DevOps engineer. Not because the DevOps engineer is equally important, but it's what's going on. It's who's bringing in money to the business. So in a hospital, you've got doctors and nurses. If I, as a nurse practitioner, admit my patient to a hospital, the hospital gets to charge my patient. I don't work for the hospital. I admit my patient to the hospital, and the hospital gets a $100,000 bill to bill the patient. The hospital loves me. By comparison, if I was a nurse working for the hospital, they'd be actually paying me to actually carry out patient care, and I would be an expense. So they're not going to like me as much, the hospital. So who do you think they're going to pay more, the person that brought in money to the hospital or the person that's an expense? So I will tell you, pick the one you like. If you enjoy engineering, be a DevOps engineer. It's a great career. If you enjoy design and sales, be an architect. It doesn't matter, Tide. Just be great at what you like. Love what you do. If you make your vacation your vocation, you will never work a day in your life. So find what makes you happiest. That's my guidance for you there, Tide. And whatever your perspective is here as well. I know you've got a great perspective of things.
Well, I mean, this is really interesting. Anyway, it just comes down to whether you like hands-on activities or whether you like being around people and understanding, people's issues and resolving those people's issues. I think you're just approaching you're more or less trying to achieve the same objective, but by doing it in two different ways. In some ways, I would say the architect's position, Mike, is quite challenging because in the end, you're dealing with sometimes a number of intangibles, which you can't really control. There are elements, contractual terms that come in to know they're more or less cost concerns or things like that you need to do, and being able to really gather or capture all that information and at the same time too, because a lot of it is as well, and that's why I say sales training is so important, because you have to sell, you have to convince the other party that this element of what you're proposing to them is the right thing for that person, and that takes a certain part of the skill set, certain part of, as you say, emotional intelligence, a certain type of relatability, which you need now. And DevOps too is a different skill set, which, being able to really understand the intricacies and the fundamentals of how a system really works. I would say it really comes down to what really suits you, it suits your personality. It's not a question of one being, harder or the other. There's some people who are brilliant at relatability, but find the whole notion of hands-on or technical, getting down technical. So, it just drives them into a fit. Other people who have great hands-on skills, but don't want to deal with the kind of like the political type of things that comes, with dealing with, whether it's with selling and the like. So it comes down to your personality. And pick what suits your personality. But I think I come back to the same theme, in that in the end, a little bit of knowing how to sell yourself, or to sell your position, or to convince another party about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, will not do you any harm.
Not at all. And I think that's a great perspective there, Akwo. It's interesting for me, coming from healthcare, dealing with politics, emotional intelligence things. I don't even think about it. It's effortless for me. So maybe that's why I don't see the effort there. But, you're right. Some people don't like to be presenting in front of groups of people. And some people really don't like selling. I can't imagine why. To me, that's the most fun part of my day, is when I get to talk to people and interact. But that's me. But that's my outgoing personality type. So great perspective. Jesse, if you want to bring in the next one. Ty, do we teach the Cisco CCNA certification? It's quite interesting. In our Cloud Architect Career Development Program, we teach something in between the CCNA and CCNP. And what we try and do is we try and give you what you need. For example, there are parts of the CCNA that you need to know about. You need to know about VLANs, for example, and you need to know about NAT, and you need to know about routing protocols, and you need to know about QoS. Those are the components that we do teach. Now, BGP, which we teach, is not covered in the CCA. That's covered a little in the CCNP and a lot in the CCIE, but it's a critical skill, so we cover it. So when we're teaching our networking in the program, we're teaching something that's between a CCNA and a CCIE. When we're actually teaching, for example, the security in the program, we're pretty much at the CISSP level in what we're actually teaching. And the architecture piece, we're getting very, very detailed. So the answer is yes. And Tide, please vote for the course that we're going to teach, because on November 9th, we're going to either teach a free CCNA class, live boot camp every day online, 3 hours for 5 days, just like now, or we're going to be doing an AWS Advanced Networking. I don't even know what the results are. I just know I'm going to be teaching it. So whatever that case may be, it'll be fun. Jesse, you want to bring in the next one? Harris A, for someone just starting out or wanting to get into the cloud engineer, what language for you to master or get used to? I would say Python for cloud engineering. But what do you call it? Akwo, I'll have you answer that as well.
I agree with that. Python is a good one. I've heard a lot of people talk of Go, which is something that was developed especially for the GCP platform. So that may be one too that you can worth considering.
I think that's great. Node.js might be something you might want to work for, just because you're going to do some IAM kind of policies and things like that. But definitely Python, I think, would be a great place to start. Saran Hamid Khalid, you're studying for the RHCE and AWS and container. Is it good or bad? Sanan, please tell me what career you actually like and what actual job you desire, and then I can tell you if that's good or bad. There's never anything that's good or bad. The key is whether it's related to the actual job you desire. For example, if you want to be an architect and study sysops, it's going to be bad for your brand. Whereas if you want to do sysops, it's going to be great for your exam, for your brand. So the key is, what is it that you actually desire to do? And since I don't know that, I can't answer it yes, but if you tell me, I would love to. Jesse, you want to take us to the next one? Jason Kinsey. Now, this is a really great question, and we're going to answer it not in the way you think. After obtaining your AWS Solution Architect certification, you realize the companies are looking for multi-cloud architects. Yes, they are. What would you recommend as your architect, or learn GCP next? So I want to be really clear here, Jesse. I don't want you to go get certified in 10 different clouds. I want you to learn the cloud, and they're not the same. So if you desire to be an architect, the first thing that I would go, if you've passed the AWS Certified Solution Architect Associate, the next thing that I would do is the AWS Certified Solution Architect Professional. That AWS Certified Solution Architect Professional, I view as the minimum entry-level certification to get a job. Minimum entry level. Now, I'm going to tell you that I think the Certified Solution Architect Professional is about 8 to 10% of what's necessary. The other 90 to 92% pertains to network and data center knowledge. It actually pertains to business acumen, communication skills, architectural design skills, emotional intelligence, sales skills, ROI modeling, and the rest. So I'd say the Certified Solution Architect Professional is 8 to 10% of the total process. We teach the total process. But Jason, the key is, it's not that I want you being prepared for every cloud. But if all you do is learn AWS, and if you learn AWS names of services and how to configure them, like certification, S3 bucket, how to configure it, EC2 instance and how to configure it. If you do it that way, you're never going to be able to do the job. Now, by comparison, if you learn the technologies, if you learn what a router is, if you learn what is BGP and how does BGP work and how to tune it, modify, how to use it, if you learn what a load balancer is, if you learn what a firewall is, if you learn what an IDS IPS system is, if you look at, if you know about server virtualization or virtual machines and containers, then if you need object storage and you want to go to the AWS store, you pick S3. If you want to go to the micro store, you pick Blob. You want to go to Google, you pick cloud storage. If you want a virtual machine, whether it's a virtual machine in the data center on VMware ESXi, whether it's a virtual machine on Azure, a compute engine instance in GCP, or a EC2 instance in AWS, Jason, it is identical. So learn how to drive. And what I mean by that is, when you learn how to drive, you learn how to drive a car. And if it's a car or it's a moderately small truck, you drive it the same. It's got a steering wheel, it's got an accelerator, it's got a brake, it's got a gear shift. Every cloud is the same. The only thing that's different is the name of the service. That's it, and how they're configured. All of it is identical. So learn the network, learn the data center, learn the underlying tech. And you want to know, Jason, how powerful this actually is? For an experiment, I don't work on the Google Cloud. I think the Google Cloud is an amazing cloud. But in my career, I've never had the opportunity to work on the Google Cloud. Worked on Nutanix Cloud, OpenStack Ansible clouds, Azure clouds, AWS clouds, Cisco clouds, but I never worked on the Google Cloud. Do you know what I did? I wanted to prove something to my team. I said, any good cloud architect can master another certification within 2 days' notice if they understand it. So to prove my point, right after we wrote the AWS Certified Solution Architect professional book that we wrote, I said to my partner, I said, I'm going to go pass the Google Professional Cloud Architect exam next week. And of course, my partner Nathan said, you're crazy. And people always tell me when I'm crazy when I tell them about my lofty goals. So what I did is I timed it perfectly. I ordered from Amazon the Cybex, SYBX book for the Google Professional Cloud Architect. Recommend the Cybex books, everyone. Cybex book comes on a Friday. Told my wife when it showed up, I wanted to read it, but I couldn't read it till Saturday. Read the book on Saturday, read the book on Sunday. On Monday, I took the Google Professional Cloud Architect exam and passed it in 45 minutes. The point is, Jason, I knew the cloud. When you know the cloud, it's nothing to go from cloud provider to cloud provider. If your focus is on certification by comparison, and certifications about the name of the service and how to configure it, and we don't do any of that as architects anyway, but if your focus is on just like the way the AWS certification would do it, then they're there. Now, Jason, there are certain certifications that are awesome, like the Aviatrix Multi-Cloud Network Engineer, which work on all clouds, and professional especially. Those are really great things, Jason. But all in all, kind of make sure what you have is the knowledge of how it works. Worry less about getting a million certifications, but be great at how it works. That's my perspective, Akwo. Jason, that's the way I do it. Akwo, what's your perspective?
I think I couldn't have put it any better, Mike. And I wholly agree with that train of thoughts. I think it's best to become as proficient as you can in one cloud, and then look at the areas which the cloud computing is heavily dependent upon: networking, virtualization, the everything to do with compute. And from there, you already have a base. So if at all somebody wishes you to go to another cloud, you can do that. And I think the other thing to really say is that the various cloud service providers are taking talent from each other. So if you already have competency in understanding what the fundamentals are, that's absolutely great. So unless you really want to, then go and get the certification for this other cloud for GCP, if that's what you really want to do. But as Mike said, yes, build your knowledge on networking, build your knowledge on the virtualization, and we see that there are standards there for the networking, where they can either go Cisco, Juniper, or Aruba. Get your training there. For virtualization, you can't go wrong with VMware or even Citrix or Azure and the like. So I think the advice I think would be best. So unless you really want to just get another certification there, so you can end up being a jack of all of them, but somebody will really ask, but what are you really specialist about? Just to add from that, I think there's a colleague that I worked with that really got me interested in cloud computing over the years. And the one thing that I found about him is that he only specialized on one thing, on Microsoft. He started off as a Microsoft certified systems engineer, stuck to Azure, and really he's a subject matter expert on Azure. You come to him with Azure, and he's built a great living with that. So you can do the same thing too for AWS, and I'm sure that there are people too that will do the same thing too for GCP and the like.
And I think Jason, it's a matter of just being great. People like me, I would never put on my resume that I was a Cisco network engineer. I'd put network engineer or network architect. And the thing is, because of that, I was trained on Cisco. A year after I trained on Cisco, I worked for a Cisco competitor. OSPF was still OSPF. BGP was still BGP. PIM sparse mode was still PIM sparse mode. And DVMRP was still DVMRP. Nothing changed other than the commands. So just focus on becoming great at it. You will do wonderful, Jason. Thanks for the question. If we want any more, come back, ask another question. We'd be thrilled. Jesse, you want to bring on the next one? Melee 3000, do you need a CCIE before getting to a cloud and obtaining certs? You don't need anything before getting into the cloud and obtaining certs. The key is, what builds a good foundation. Right now, you're in break 6, and you hold an A+ and a Network Plus. So Melee, the thing with the A+ Network Plus is it's a very junior intro certification, and that's okay. So if you know a lot about networking, for example, Melee, do you know BGP? Do you know the way the protocol works? Do you know how it forms an adjacency, the messages it sent? Do you understand, how to tune OSPF? Do you understand VLANs, VLAN tagging, VLAN trunking? Do you understand how to design an organization's wide IP addressing scheme? If you do, you've got good network knowledge, and you don't need it. If you don't, you're going to need more networking knowledge. So and do you need to get another certification? Not really. You need the knowledge. Now, it depends on the goal you're actually looking for. If you are new and you lack experience, for example, if you're doing break fix right now, and break fixes, and you want to move to architecture, getting some better certifications would help. So imagine if you had an Aviatrix multi-cloud network professional, an AWS certified solution architect, and a CCNP. You've got a very strong networking brand and a good cloud architect brand. But the key is, that's the perception if you wanted to do networking. If you wanted to do security, it might make sense to have a CISSP and a certified solution architect professional. So the certifications that you get and the training that you should do should be focused on exactly your perfect goal career. So your career determines. So what you should start doing is saying, this is my career. If this is my career, this is my starting point. Let me bring it over here. If this is the skills needed and this is my starting point, your training and certification should be to take you from your starting point to your destination. And that should be based upon your end career. So I want you to start with your end career first and then work back up. Your end career, for example, if you told me you wanted to do cloud security, I'd say security. Security certs that are good are the CISSP, the CCSP, the offensive security professional, and the CEH master. They're the 4 that are good for getting people hired. Get one of those modules. Oh, wait, you want to work on Azure? Okay, Azure Expert and CISSP, that's your certification portfolio. So determine the ultimate goal, and then the certifications that are going to be focused, that are going to build your brand toward getting the goal. That's what I want you to do. Akwo, do you have any guidance there?
Yep, CCNA will be great for you to have. I think it ultimately depends, as you say, where you want to end up. I think for the CCNA, that is the ideal foundation for anybody that wants to deal with large networks. If you want to manage a network for in the telecommunication service provider, or you want to manage these networks for a company, then that's an absolutely essential starting point for you to go with as an area. And if you want to also become a better cloud engineer, you don't do yourselves any harm by doing it that way. So, yeah, great question, Malay.
And Jesse, you want to bring in the next one? Love when we get a lot of questions. And while we're answering the next questions, could all of you put in the chat box where you're from or where you're living? Like some of you, maybe you're in the UK, maybe you're in Cameroon, maybe you're in Belgium, maybe you're in Florida like me, maybe you're in Canada. I always love knowing where we have the group of people that are coming from. It's just so exciting to reach such a big audience. And then Jesse, if you can bring the next question in. Gulshan, you've done the SA Pro recently. Which certification do I suggest you get next? I don't know, Mr. Kumar, what career you actually desire. The type of career you desire will tell you which certification to get next. But I am going to give you one piece of advice. The data that recently came out from Robert Half Technology showed that a certification can, on average, raise someone's salary upwards of $10,000 to $14,000 per year. Now, the data on training soft skills shows that it can increase someone's salary by 33% per year. Now, the data on training emotional intelligence equals $29.6 thousand more per year. So what does that mean? Whenever you take your time and time, effort, and money, and you spend the time, you can only spend it in one place. So you already have a good certification. So if you go from a good certification to another certification, let's assume it can give you a $10,000 impact to your career. Now, let's just work with the numbers of the average cloud architect earning about $160,000 a year. Training soft skills has the ability to, on average, raise your salary by about $60,000 per year. And training emotional intelligence has the ability to raise your salary by about $30,000 per year. So if you add those two up, it's $90,000. Now subtract the $10,000 that you could have made by getting an extra certification, and you're ahead $80,000 a year by shifting your training to the softer skills and the emotional intelligence place. Over the course of a 30-year career, that's an additional $2.4 million. So the question is, first, I don't know which career you're looking for, and the career determines your certification. Secondly, the next side is what's more valuable to you. Is your goal designed to maximize your career potential? Does it have to do with salary? Does it have to do with leadership? If so, don't be doing it on the tech, doing it on the leadership side. But what if you love the tech? What if you want to be the distinguished architect that focuses everything on the tech because you love it? Then maybe you get a CCIE if you want to be on the networking side. Or maybe you get, or maybe you do a couple of security things like the CISSP if you want to be on security. So again, the career that you desire determines the training path to get there. When I go to my friend's house, I put in his address into my GPS and I go there. If I wanted to go visit Akwo, and I'd love to visit Akwo, I know he's over in the UK, and one of these days, very soon, I'm going to get to do that. It probably would be easier for me to leave my house, go to the Miami airport, and fly to London than it would be for me to go leave Palm Beach, Florida, fly to San Jose, go from San Jose to Hawaii, go from Hawaii to England. I mean, that's not the shortest distance between 2 points, but the destination determines that. But if I want to go to my village in Greece, it might be better for me to go straight from Miami to Greece than it might be to go to England along the way. So to me, determine your ultimate destination and then build the map. But Akwo, I'd love your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, brilliant answer, Mike. I'll definitely say that, look at areas which you're very specifically interested in, and so build a niche. If you can get a niche area which you really like, then put your efforts in that. I think that maybe it may not be too long before the likes of AWS come up with another, stage higher maybe than the solution architect professional. So you may look at that until it comes. But for the time being, I think you've reached the limit. Which I mean, by all means, it's a great qualification. So I would say definitely build your soft skills. If you have the opportunity to invest in sales training, as I said, the same advice which I gave to Abigail, that would not be anything wasted. That would be a very, very worthwhile endeavor. So if you're looking for any certifications or any training to do beyond that, any form of sales training to complement the technical skills which you have accrued over this time would be most useful. I'm telling you, it'll actually give you a different perspective altogether. So in the end, if you feel that you want to stay in the technical part, you can do so, but at the same time too, you actually, it frees up your mind knowing that, yes, you can also do some selling if at all you'll know. It's a life skill. So definitely, I would advise that sales training, if you have the possibility, do that.
And I would as well. Wow, I'm looking at this group, and I know it's bigger than this because only a few people responded. But Katy, Texas, Canada, Miami, Singapore, Brazil, Canada, Atlanta, Brussels in Belgium, which makes sense. and I know we've got a fair number of Cameroonians here, most of which are in Belgium right now. Australia, Atlanta, California, Virginia Beach. This is just, I love this. For years, I never used social media because I didn't want anybody to know anything about me in New Zealand. And then it hit me that, what an incredible way to actually be able to communicate, share knowledge with such an international community. So for me, this is about as good as life could ever truly be. So it's exciting for me. So more people, India, Canada, Rhode Island. This is just really fantastic. So, there's a couple of questions that came in. One of them is pretty serious. I want to make sure we get to it, and it's from Harris A. But before we do that, Jesse, were there any other questions before we got to this? Gridahar, Guri Dahar, if I mispronounce your name, I'm so sorry. You're limited to a /16 to a /28 in AWS, no matter which class. Yes, totally true. We seem to get the same number of IPs. Does the class matter? Meaning like class A, B, C? No, we haven't been using IP classes for about 20 years. So and what I mean by that is, we're going to be subnetting everything that we're going to be doing, and nothing adheres to a class A, B, C, and that's why we're dealing with classless interdomain routing. So we don't deal with any address classes such as A, B, or C. We subnet everything down. So Jesse, if you want to bring in the next one. Now, this is an interesting one from Abigail Marks. Could ADHD be an asset? Abigail, anything you have used properly can be an asset. So here's what I mean by this. If you're a healthcare provider and you're obsessive compulsive, it is a really good thing. So people that really that would be 1% obsessive compulsive, but a healthy degree, but not a sicko degree, but a healthy degree, where it helps. So for example, let's say I'm in healthcare. Being 1% obsessive compulsive means you check your patient's charts twice. You make sure you didn't miss anything. You call the patients, you call the family members, you call the other doctors, and you double check your work and you save lives. Could being, for example, 2% obsessive compulsive save you as an architect? The answer is yes, because it's going to keep you from making mistakes by making you double and triple things. Now, being an ADHD person, ADHD typically makes people very energetic, but they also bounce from topic to topic. But the ADHD people, if you can get them to focus, can often do well. But, what you're going to find, Abigail, is when you reach the elite levels of business, everybody basically has ADHD. Boom, 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 boom. And my COO, Chris, who I have the deepest respect for, he's really, really amazing. He calls me the other day and he's like, Mike, this is high priority, and this is high priority, and this is high priority. And now you're building out a team. You're bringing in a guy from India. You just hired Jesse. It's like everything's instant. We have to do by this minute. And then a minute later, there's a new thing that has to be done. And I'm like, he's like, that's like ADHD. I'm like, no, it's pretty typical normal executive behavior. All executives have 50 things going through their head. So could ADHD be an asset? Abigail, anything you have, good or bad, if you use it properly, could be an asset. I am wound way too tight. I am wound so tight you can't possibly even imagine. So I could have been wound too tight, had anxiety, taken medications like people did. Or what did I do because I was wound too tight? I mastered martial arts. I did 3 hours of martial arts. I went and did an MBA while I was working full time. No big deal. In addition to having an MBA while I was working full time, I started a business on the side. So could having ADHD be an asset? It can, if you make it work to your advantage. So any tool that you have that makes you great or different can be an asset, but used properly. But Alonzo, I'd love your perspective on that as well.
Oh, you mean Akwo? Alonzo, I think, is part of the audience.
Oh, did I say Alonzo instead of Akwo? If I did, I am so sorry. I just looked at Alonzo, who's a really good friend of mine, who's working with me on a big project, and I had him pulled up on the side window in the chat. So apologies for that, Akwo.
No worries. Yeah. So I think, Abigail, any kind of thing which you can take and use to your advantage is a plus for me. I don't know too much about the actual subject area in itself, but I think Mike, with his great medical background, I think he's given the best advice there. Okay, great stuff.
Sounds great. And then Jesse, if you want to bring in the next one. Ty, what kinds of businesses provide the most growth for a cloud architect? Again, this is going to be one of these things. So I will tell you there are certain industries that have more money to play with than others. For example, banking, it's a great place to work, great jobs, great salaries, massive bonuses. And why is it such a great place to work? They have so much money and tech is such a competitive advantage that they will literally buy anything to be a nanosecond faster than their competition. So I love that. So banking is good. When you work at the vendors, you have the opportunity to learn more because they invent the stuff. So you get to learn a lot more. So opportunities there. But tied again, it goes back to you. So if I go and do consulting, cloud computing for healthcare organizations, here's the thing. I'm going to be wildly successful in healthcare, more successful in healthcare than any other industry. And it's not because healthcare has more money. It has less money. It's not because healthcare is at the leading edge. Believe me, healthcare is 10 years behind. But I'll make more money in healthcare. Why will I make more money in healthcare? Because I can practice medicine and I know the workflows of medicine. And I can create an architecture in medicine that will save patients' lives and make a hospital operate more efficiently. So even though it's not the best industry, like banking would probably be the best, I can still do better. So again, Tide, it's based upon you, what you know, what you love, what you care about. It's all based upon those things. So certain industries are better, but with anything else, people say, I want to make money. What should I do? And I say, do what you love. And they're like, what do you mean do what you love? And I say, if what you do, if you're good at it, if you're passionate at it, if you love it, and you put everything into being the best in the world, whether you own a house cleaning business, whether you own a Greek diner like my family did, where we served eggs, gyros, souvlaki, and Greek salads, it doesn't matter. If you're great at it, you'll do well. But Akwo, you've done some great things in your career. So let's take your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work across a different number of organizations. Profit organizations. Commercial such as the banking, financial services, manufacturing, fast-moving consumer goods, and then the not-for-profit sector where you have government, education, healthcare, charities. So, and you'd find that all of these organizations require the same thing. But if you take one of them and then you become a specialist in that area, that would really be amazing. And if you become the point person, whereby people say, okay, if you're dealing with charities, or you're making a name for yourself in education and anything, a cloud architect that is focused on the education sector, healthcare sector, or even the mining sector, for example, or the retail sector, that in itself would really make you stand out, because you're focusing very much on that vertical and in the needs of that vertical. And I would imagine that if you do so, you'll be compensated, by the fact that you've become an expert there, and everybody will be coming to you as a point of reference. So there's not really one particular area. I mean, there's some industries definitely that have that have very deep pockets of that nature there. But in the end, I think people or industries will reward competence. And if they find that you're competent and you focus on that niche area of that industry, everything that there is about it, I think you're guaranteed to do well. It's a no-brainer on that basis.
And I tend to completely agree with you. Now, I know we're getting short on time, especially because I have a class to teach in 30 minutes. And then tonight we have another special guest, but I'm having so much fun with you, Akwo. You've got so much great cloud networking and networking background that I love having people like you to share your experience to make the world a better place. But Jesse, if you could please bring up the Harris A question, because it's very important. Now, this question really hits home for me. And I want to talk about it because the question is, if I want to become a cloud architect, but I'm starting off with languages, would it be a good first step to be a cloud engineer, or should I go down another path to be a cloud architect? Harris A, the reason I call attention to this is this really gets to me. If you want to be a cloud architect, go learn how to be a cloud architect. If you want to be an airplane pilot, go learn how to be an airplane pilot. If you want to be a doctor, go learn how to be a doctor. I don't know why that people have convinced people that you should study a different career on the way to get to your career. If you want to be a cloud architect and that's your goal, start learning architecture, start learning system design, and the such. So if you want to be a cloud architect, don't learn to code. It's not relevant. And don't learn to do these things. And you know what happens, Harris A, when you've got all these coding and skills down on your resume? It makes you have the cloud engineer brand, which is not a cloud architect brand. And here's what we have to do for cloud engineers. First thing we have to do with the cloud engineer, we have to redo their entire resume. We've got to get rid of a lot of the cloud engineering. We've got to get rid of the references to the software engineering. And we've got to build an architecture resume. So the architecture resume talks about the system design. It talks about the business transformation. It talks about the way after your architectural design, the business can improve its revenues by a certain number percentage, decreasing its expenses by a certain percentage. You've increased availability or uptime by a certain percentage. You've talked about your designs and its impact on the business. That's an architect resume. You talk about your presentations, your documentation. That's an architect resume. An engineering resume is going to be completely irrelevant. So if you study engineering, you're going to have to, and you do that for 3 to 5 years. When you're done the 3 to 5 years, you're going to need cloud architect training because you just trained a different career. So I say, train the career that you desire. Don't learn skills for another person's career. Learn the skills for your career. Find out exactly what they were and go be great at them and then get there. You know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. It's not a zigzag up and down. So I think if you want to be an architect, study architecture, study it, master it, be great at it. But I wouldn't be studying other people's careers on the way to get there. Akwo, if you have a perspective, because I mean, I really like your perspective as well.
No, great advice. And one of the things I'll just use my situation. I come from a networking background, and guess what? I'm going to leverage that experience very much in the cloud and use that as the backdrop, of gaining competence in the cloud. In a sense, I'm not actually learning anything really new by networking, but I'm just actually reinforcing a lot of my understanding along that area. So any kind of background which you come into, I think somebody did advise me that just look to reinforce that. I think it's the least root of resistance anyway in building. So if at all you've come from that kind of like a programming background where you're bringing it into the cloud, that's one thing. So I think leverage that as well. So that's it. So look at what kind of experiences that you have, and leverage that when you're coming into the build on that. At least it gives a better background story when you're relating to other people as well. So okay, what path has this person taken? So for me, I am clearly focused on becoming a cloud networking subject matter expert. I mean, I'm going to learn other things about the cloud, but I'm building up upon my expertise and my experience as a network professional. So look at it from that perspective as to what kind of story are you trying to convey across.
And what a way to do it, Akwo. I love the way you described it. So I have a wee bit of a strength and conditioning background. I don't really talk about it. I became a certified strength and conditioning specialist. They're the people that train pro athletes, and I'm a 500-hour yoga instructor. And I would have never done these things on my own, but I was involved in an injury where I couldn't walk for 3 years. And it took me 8 hours of physical therapy every day for 3 years just to be okay. And now it takes me 3 hours of physical therapy just to be able to walk down the stairs of my house in the morning. So, I've got a lot of background in strength and conditioning. It wasn't by trade. It was because I just needed to learn how to walk again. So I focused a lot of training and effort on that. And in the process of learning how to be a great strength and conditioning coach, which I only used for personal physical therapy, I learned how gymnasts train. I mean, I knew how martial artists train. And here's the thing. When you have an Olympic martial artist, like an Olympic judo player or an Olympic gymnast, here's what they do. Gymnastics, and more gymnastics. And when they're not doing gymnastics, do you know what they do? They do strength training. They do power training. They do flexibility training. They get massages. They do recovery things. Everything that goes into that Olympian is either directly to their thing or it's something to support that effort. When you train a Navy SEAL, everything is directed on one thing. When you train a physician, everything is directed on one thing. These architect jobs are the best jobs in the world. I mean, you will have freedom. You will be treated wonderfully. You will be compensated well. You will have the respect. You will change people's lives. You will make the world a better place if you desire to by creating technology that solves human problems. You can do so much in this career. But in order to be able to make these positive changes, Harris A, and I know you can, you've got to know it with a lot of expertise. And the only way you can be an expert in something is to put all your time and effort into learning one thing. If you divide your effort and learn other things, you'll never be great at the one thing you want to do. So learn architecture, and learn some more architecture. If you're looking for things to learn the things that'll help you: networking, security, and all those network and data center technologies. You master those things and the business reasons, you will be amazing. So hope I answered your question there. So Akwo, do you have any closing comments for people? You've shared such great information so far today.
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to say is I'd like to thank you all for your very keen attention today, taking the time out to hear the perspective. I'd also like to salute my fellow Wi-Fi Cloud members who are here today to support me. They've been very instrumental in helping me in my journey as a cloud architect. And also I'd like to also commend to the immense resources and the leadership of you, Mike, with the Go Cloud Architects program. It's really being eye-opening, and I'm really truly humbled and privileged anyway of being part of that. So I'd like to thank you all again for your keen detail, and I hope you learned, you found our discussion today interesting and inspiring for you, and knowing that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your experience or your background, but it really depends on your attitude, your enthusiasm coming into this. So I'd like to thank you very much for receiving me today. And Mike, once again, many thanks.
And Akwo, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise. I got to meet you, 5 months ago, 6 months ago. We had a fun conversation. You popped into our training program, and it's been an amazing experience. I also have to say, for the We're Fun Iron, and I always get the name wrong, even though I love this group. I mean, I speak to Banjika constantly. Banjika, Yolanda, yourself, and all the amazing people. I've spoke to nurses in that group. I mean, some people that are truly amazing. And I'm going to say this again, because I know a lot of them are there. Anytime you want me to pop in via Zoom on that group and teach something, whether it be architecture or whatever, I'm always happy to pop in. So for the group, for the Win Fun Iron, We Fun, did I get that name right? Even though I know We Fun. Oh, there you go. It always feels like it's going to be some complicated Belgian word to me. So for the We Fun group, I got to tell you, I love you all. I know many of you personally. I've had a chance to work with many of you personally, and thank you for being here to support Akwo. I really appreciate you being here today. So again, I want to reinforce and re-echo what Akwo said. Anybody from any background can do these jobs. Nothing is holding anyone back. When it comes to tech like this, there are so few people in the world that have the skill. There are so many opportunities because it is so hard to find someone that's capable and qualified. So no matter where you're at in the world, no matter what challenge is ahead of you, if you work hard and if you try, you can achieve this, and you can and you will win. So for all of you that are here that are working hard to be better, thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me and Akwo to come and talk to you to try and help you. I'm going to let people know that tonight my COO is gone. He's dealing with some family issues this week. So my Jesse from my team and I, we're going to actually come back a second time today. My chief operating officer is really smart, and he tells me, Mike, you can't be on camera 12 hours in one day, but he's away. So in Greece, there's an expression that says when the cat's away, the rats dance. So I'll be dancing today. I'll be on camera. I am going to have my friend Daryl Proctor come at 5 p.m. US, which means 10 p.m. UK time. For any of you that can join, please join. Please join. Daryl was a senior director at Dell. Daryl leads a team of customer success executives at Palo Alto. Daryl and I both took turns getting each other hired throughout his careers, and I would love to have him share some leadership. So, looking forward to seeing as many of you as I can tonight. I know it'll be late in Central European time where a lot of you guys are at, whether it's Cameroon or Belgium. Some of you guys are in UK, but if you can join us, we'd love to see you. Akwo, again, every time I speak to you, I'm happy. Whether I speak to you on a personal phone call, whether I speak to you in public, I'm happy. You bring so much to the cloud world, so much to the networking world, and you brought so much to our community. Thank you, Akwo.
Thank you, Mike. Truly honored. Yeah, pleasure to be here, guys. Good luck.
Thank you so much. And we will see you all later. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye for now. Take care.